of Del Mar College will meet. It's called to order for a called meeting at 9:04 a.m. on Thursday, May 28th. We are meeting by video and or teleconference in the IC boardroom in Corpus Christi. Due to health and safety concerns related to the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic, this meeting is being conducted by video and or teleconference. The meeting is being conducted in accordance with guidance from the Office of the Governor and Attorney General of the State of Texas, under significant provisions of the Texas Government Code and other Open Meetings Act. The public is not attending this meeting in person. We do have a mechanism by which the public may view the meeting and or listen to the meeting, and we will have public comment in just a few moments. We have a quorum in the boardroom. I'm going to go around the boardroom and ask everyone to say present, and then those who are joining us by video link as well. Regent Salinas.
Present.
Mr. Adami.
Present.
Mr. Rivas. Mrs. Estrada. Mr. Bennett.
Present.
Ms. Abert.
Present.
Ms. Hutchison.
Present.
Dr. Sherwood. Dr. Sherwood is present. So we do have a quorum and can conduct business. We'll begin with a moment of silence. Thank you. Mr. Rivas, would you join us, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. And would you all please join me in reading the Del Mar Vision Statement. Del Mar College will be the premier choice for life-changing educational opportunities provided by responsive, innovative faculty and staff who empower students to improve local and global communities. Del Mar College is streaming live audio and video from this meeting in real time, with the exception of portions of the meeting as may be considered closed session. Again, as I said earlier, we had an opportunity for the public to give comments. We do have two individuals who have made public comment, and those are going to be played from a previous recording at this time.
Yes, this is a public comment. My name is Jack Gordy. I live at 4118 Bray Drive, and I want to comment on Del Mar violating state law, the Public Information or Freedom of Information Act. I turned in a request, and Del Mar received it the 18th of March. It's been 39 working days. 39 working days, and I'm still waiting for a response. And I know the information is available. This Board of Regents needs to make sure and stop, and I'll repeat that word, make sure and stop Del Mar from violating state law. There's no excuse and there is no reason for Del Mar to take 39 working days. 39 working days to answer a public information request. And like I said, Del Mar got my request on the 18th of March. It's been 39 days. There's no excuse. And this Board of Regents should do what you were elected to do and make sure they quit violating the law.
Yes, my name is Annie Case, and I'd like to say that the Professor Sisterhood in the music department is the most non-professional professor I've ever known, and is extremely hard on his students, both in the classroom and in personality-wise, and I would never hire that man, but that's just my opinion. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes the public comment for this meeting. We are happy to have with us Dr. Bill Holden, who will be leading the board retreat for the next day and a half. I want to thank all the regents for your patience and for your attendance today. It was important for us to continue with this meeting, and so we are very appreciative of the fact that you were all here, both virtually and here in the room with us. And so with that, I'm going to turn over the day to, or the morning at least, to Dr. Bill Holda. Thank you, Bill, for joining us.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you. Very much pleasure. It's been a number of years since I've been back to Corpus Christi and to Del Mar College. I'm just amazed at some of the growth that I've seen in the community. It's unbelievable. It was a good trip down here, about 7 hours drive, and gave me a lot of time to think about you, the board, and about this retreat. So what we want to do today is be predisposed that this is really going to be a good day and a half for you, the Board of Regents at Del Mar College. There's a real power in predisposition. My voice teacher, Ralph Appleman at Indiana University, was in his 70s when he was teaching me voice. And I was a voice pedagogy major, so we were learning to become voice teachers. And he wanted us to be able to tell our students about the power of predisposition so that they would understand that the predisposition of their audience affected how their performance, their recitals were received. He was for years, did the choir and the kids choir and all the little handbell stuff at the Methodist Church in Bloomington, Indiana. Had a big bass voice, huge bass voice. And after he retired from that job, the little old ladies group at the church asked him to come on Wednesday night and do a program and sing some songs, spiritual songs. And the week before his presentation, he got a really bad cold. His eyes were watering and he was sniffling. So he called the church and said, I just can't sing. I'm just got such a bad cold. And the president of the little old ladies group said, Ralph, that doesn't matter. Just come and read the 23rd Psalm for us. So he shows up for the gathering. And he said, I held my Bible up and I went, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He said, I looked out there and they were all crying. So they were predisposed to be moved. And so people who go to a ball game, to an event, to church, predisposition has a lot of the way you receive it. So I'm predisposed today that this is going to be a really good experience for the Board of Regents today and tomorrow. And I'm asking you to predispose yourselves and tell yourselves this is going to be a really good experience. It has a lot better chance of being that way if that's where you're oriented. So when we look at the purpose, let's see here, I'm trying to get this to advance. There we go. So when we look at the purpose of the retreat, it has multiple purposes. One is to do a little gut check on where we are as a board, to do an assessment of where we have been this past year and where we want to go next year, to look at issues that involve high-performing boards, teamwork, helping boards stay focused on their realm, and what is the arena in which board members can work and act. So there are quite a few things that we want to accomplish in this retreat. And as we go through this, I want to go through the agenda first and then talk about some ground rules. So if you look at the agenda today from 9 to 9:30, we're going to get started and go through this opening session pretty quickly. 9:30 to 10:30, the board is a team. We'll take a break at 10:30 to 10:45, and then we will look at board roles, functions, policies, operations. And I've got a long list: best practices, characteristics of high-performing boards, policy versus management, looking at examples of where boards should and should not be focused, hearing from you the levels of financial accountability you're looking for, individual board member support for the decisions of the full board, channels of interaction with faculty, staff, social media, dealing with the press, ethical expectations, and other practices, including maybe how you run your meetings. So we got quite a bit in that category. And I'm going to stay pretty flexible because although I've got a series of slides, if some issues come up and you as regents want to say something or you think there's an issue that needs to be addressed, I definitely want to take some time to address those. Then we'll take a break at 11:45, and we'll gather back at lunch. And because of the distancing that we have anyway, you're not going to be able to do the level of lunchtime socialization. So I did hear from a lot of you about the KPIs and setting goals. And so Dr. Christina Ramirez-Wilson is going to present some data, and she and I have sort of worked on this a couple times during the lunch break. After lunch, we'll continue what we were doing before lunch, which is the roles, functions, and talk about even some of that policy development. Take a break at 1:45. At 2, the board will go into closed session and deal with its self-assessment, recess for the day at 4. Then tomorrow morning, the goal is from 9 to 10:30 to have the board actually form its strategic plan for the upcoming year based on the feedback we heard, not only from your self-evaluation, but, and I want to thank all of the regents, because I had about an hour-long conversation with just about all of the 9, well, with all of the 9 regents, but it was almost an hour with each of you, and it was rich. I learned so much, and it was a great conversation. So it helped me develop a context for the board and identify themes that you identified as issues you wanted me to address during this retreat. So I think one of the first things we want to do is cover a few ground rules. Full active conscious participation. So each one of those words means something: full, active, and conscious. You don't want to be unconscious, obviously, but we want you to really be engaged and to feel very comfortable chiming in at any juncture that you really want to agree or disagree with me. Challenge me if I present something with which you disagree. Any idea worth holding, worth defending. No one has absolute truth cornered. And we can have differences of opinion, not right or wrong. About a year ago, a lady in the East Texas area was going around to the county commissioners' courts in Rusk County, Gregg, and Upshur and Harrison. And she was trying to get each commissioner's court to pass a resolution that they would not accept any undocumenteds in their county. And Rusk County actually approved it, but Gregg County refused to approve it. And Gary Boyd said, there's no way to track that. We don't even know where people are. How can we pass a law to prohibit people from living in our area if we don't even know that they're undocumented or who they are? So she just went on a tear. And after she went on her rant, he said, ma'am, I'm not saying I'm right and you're wrong, or that you're right and I'm wrong. I'm just saying we have a difference of opinion. So differences of opinion are healthy. And so a healthy board and a healthy organization that can handle differences of opinion and not personalize those is going to usually arrive at much better decisions than when there is such unanimity. I think Will Rogers said this: it isn't what we don't know that gets us trouble. It's what we know for sure that just ain't so. So Winston Gardner was editor of the Kilgore News Herald for years, and his wife June was force, and she was real active in the community. And at her funeral, Winston said, I'd like to put on her gravestone, not always right, but never in doubt. So all of us have met some people like that who are not always right, but never in doubt. So none of us know, none of us have truth cornered. We don't know always what we're doing. Let's see. So I do have a question. Will this advance if I press the arrow? It should? Okay. Okay, let me go back a moment. So I don't know if this will connect. If it doesn't, this is a little 4-minute video about the Abilene Paradox. And if it'll play, great. If not, I'll just have to relate the story.
Folks, it all started on one of those typical July afternoons in Coleman, Texas. A hot wind from the Panhandle was blowing fine-grained Texas topsoil right through my in-laws' house. But despite the heat, we were having what for Coleman was a rip-roaring afternoon of Sunday entertainment.
Dominic.
Sure game, hon.
Well, that's another one for Jerry. Shuffle him. Just my luck to get a son-in-law that can beat me at dominoes.
That young fella there is me. Right after we were married, my wife Beth and I used to spend 2 glorious weeks of our summer vacation visiting with her parents. And while we were there, we frequently immersed ourselves in the group dynamics of a good old-fashioned game of dominoes. Later, I went on to study group dynamics of a different sort in all kinds of organizations. But is it so different? The fact is, the more I learn about the way we deal with one another in organizations, the more I'm reminded of that hot Sunday, July afternoon in Coleman, Texas, and something I now call the Abilene Paradox.
It's 104 degrees in Coleman. Stay tuned for the livestock report. But first, here's a little music.
It's 15.
Five. Hey, what do y'all say we get in the car and go to Abilene, have supper at the cafeteria?
How far away is Abilene?
53 miles.
You got the air conditioning in that Buick fixed yet?
Nope.
Well, sounds like a good idea to me. I'd like to go. How about you, Jerry?
Yeah, it sounds like a good idea to me. But I don't want to go unless your mama wants to go.
Oh, well, of course I want to go. Oh, well, y'all don't think I want to eat leftovers out of the icebox, do you?
So, we all piled into the furnace and headed off for Abilene. Some 4 hours and 106 miles later, after a supper that could have provided first-rate testimonial for antacid, we returned to Coleman. For a long while, there was absolute, teetotal silence.
It's a great trip, wasn't it?
Well, to tell the truth, I'd rather have stayed right here. Only y'all hadn't pressured me to go along.
What do you mean, y'all? I didn't want to go. I only went along to satisfy the rest of you. You're the culprits.
Don't call me a culprit. You and Daddy and Mama are the ones who wanted to go. I just went along to be sociable.
Hey, I never wanted to go to Abilene to begin with. I was just making conversation. How'd I know y'all was gonna take me up on it and ruin my whole day?
It just didn't make sense. Here we were, 4 reasonably normal people who took a trip to Abilene we really didn't want to take. You know, though, a lot of other organizations take similar trips. I later came to call it the Abilene Paradox.
You may not realize how often that happens. I had been at Kilgore College about 6 months, and the president of the college, who was an old style president, put me on the marketing committee. And the lady that ran the marketing committee, I happened to go to church with him. And so she brought in a tape for us to listen to. And it was an Anita Bryant recording, and it had been dubbed for Kilgore College. We all sat in the room and listened to it, nodded our heads. And there was dead silence in the room, much like there was on the porch there. And Bonnie Edmonds, who taught fashion merchandising, said, well, I'm going to tell you, if you're trying to recruit 60-year-olds, that's a great tape. But for kids in high school whom you're trying to attract to your college, that's a disaster. That tape never saw the light of day. But it's because one person had the courage to speak up and say, let's not take a trip to Abilene. And the reason it's a paradox in this whole deal, he has 3 more scenarios in this training video. One is a couple that's getting ready to get married and doesn't want to get married, but the parents have spent all this money already and the gifts have started to roll in, and they don't think that they can change their mind. Another is a company where R&D is trying to make jet fuel out of peanut oil, and management thinks they're crazy, and the people in R&D think management wants them to do that project. And the third was a group of faculty members trying to plan their own professional development. And in all three of those cases, there was mismanaged agreement. People were just sort of nodding their heads, and then they'd leave the room and say, that's the craziest idea I ever had. So as we go through the board retreat, we want to be sure we don't take trips to Abilene. Some organizations don't just get in the car and go to Abilene, they go by the busload. So we don't want to mismanage agreement. And one of the things that I will say, and I don't mean this at all as a criticism, it's a compliment. When I asked all of you individually what some of the strengths in the board were, I heard over and over and over that the collegiality, the respect, the love of Del Mar, but the way you treat each other. And so, so I want the board to be careful, because boards that get along that well, sometimes they don't feel as comfortable objecting or raising other points of view. So during this retreat, one of those ground rules is that. Another is, let's redefine consensus. Instead of it meaning I agree with that, it's I can live with that. And particularly as we move into later this afternoon, try to start to formulate the results of the self-evaluation and a strategic plan for the board for the upcoming year. And tomorrow morning, it's going to be developing a consensus among the board and in the board of regents that really says I can live with that. I often think if Congress and elected officials could redefine consensus, we could get a lot done. But the polarization that's there is locked into, I've got to totally agree with it to support it. So let's start with the board as a team. And I think one of the very first things we want to do is have you verbalize in any order you want, what's the why? You know, why did you become a regent? What drives your interest in being a regent? So I want to allow a couple minutes for you as regents to respond to that. And while you're doing that, I'm going to bring around a handout for you, okay? So Carol, if you want to call on regents, or you want them just to sort of identify and speak up, however you want to do that in terms of managing that.
I don't like to call on people, but I will. So does somebody volunteer to go first? Yes, Regent Salinas.
Yeah, you know, the reason I really wanted to be on the board is because I've always wanted to be, you know, have an impact on on our kids from our region. And I figured that this is one of the ways that I could do it, is to I could be a member and be here in the board. But, you know, it's been a very great experience in that I think that that is something that's happening because I like to really get involved with the community. All my life I've done it, and now I'm in a situation where I think I'm going to have a better and a greater opportunity to be able to have a lot of impact on our young kids from our area.
Regent Estrada?
Sure. I wanted to be a regent simply because after being in education 35 years, I retired, and I felt that there was something in me that was bottled up. And I felt like I had a lot of knowledge and that I could offer something, especially in the area of strategic planning. I was very involved in the process before I retired, so I felt like I had something to contribute. Thank you. Okay. There you go.
Okay. I initially wanted to get on the board of regents of Del Mar because I felt like the West Campus was being very neglected. It was still living in the age of radio and TV repair from the 50s. The parking lot was a mess, and that's what first drew my interest. And then once I got on the board, I realized that the whole college was doing real good and could go a long way. And actually, like I said, one of the promises I gave to the voters was to try to fix the parking lot at the West Campus. 2 years later, we passed the bond issue and redid the whole campus. So I'm real proud of that legacy.
Great. Ed.
I got on the board to give back to the community. Education has been very beneficial to my family. And I wanted to make sure that everybody had that same opportunity no matter what their economic situation was. So education is important to me. I wanted to see the community college thrive, get more students in here, and get them educated and get them out of here.
Libby, I'm going to call on you.
Thank you, Carol. I really believe that the success of our community is based on educating our community as best as possible. And after living here for 30 years, certainly I became aware of some of the economic challenges we have in this area. And I think that Del Mar College is key to giving people who may come from challenging situations a real opportunity to move past those situations and be contributing members of society. And I wanted to use my skills, my talents that I've developed over the years to help Del Mar College continue to thrive.
Dr. Sherwood?
Education was so important to my future, and after 27 years in higher ed in the 4-year side and having retired, and this opportunity came up, I saw that it was a way that, you know, I could continue to use the knowledge and skills I had gained over that time in higher ed, because through that time I saw how undereducated our community was and how important Del Mar is to changing that. And so it seemed a good fit.
Dr. Adami?
You know, for me, it's been about educating the community. Education has been, to me, one of the most important positions that anybody can hold. Board is an educational board. It helps to shape and mold the community and the workforce. I saw the importance of that, and I wanted to be a big part of this.
Susan?
Yes, I would say I came to the Board of Regents not as someone who is called to be an educator as the career, but someone who saw education as being important to me, my family, and I wanted to find a way to make it accessible to everyone. And I think that takes good management. I think it takes focusing on the goals of not just the students in the community. And so I love working with educators to get them to that goal.
Thank you. So my motivation to come to run for election for the Del Mar board was twofold, two or threefold. One, I was ending my career on the school board and was kind of trying to figure out what I might want to try to do next in my civic life. And so I was approached to gauge my interest in doing this. And looking at the board at that time, several folks who were still at the table or on the phone were on the board at the time. It was I think for the most part, a very highly functioning board, and a board that had done a lot of good work to lead the community and to lead Del Mar College. On a personal note, I remember my mother sitting at the dining room table when I was in elementary school with her Del Mar Viking book covers going back to school. She had a secretarial degree or certificate at the time and had worked early on in her young life and marriage, but then had 4 kids. And she had to bring my sister over to Corpus Christi from Bishop on a daily basis for a special education class. And she decided to go back to school as opposed to just sitting in the car waiting for my sister to be through with her classes. And so Mom started her degree, which ended up getting a bachelor's and a master's in early childhood education here at Del Mar College, driving back and forth. And so I remember those Del Mar Viking book covers. That's the joke that she and I have. It's like, look what happened, 50 years later. On a professional note, Del Mar, I had watched Del Mar respond to clients that I had in the industrial and business development issue. And so watching Dr. Escamilla and Lenore Keys and several folks respond to what was happening out in the community was important to me. So in making that transition from public education to higher education, it was kind of with all of that in mind and wanting to support this institution and try to use my skills as best I could to continue to support the growth of Del Mar College.
Great. So really, really inspirational to hear, for me to come here and hear as someone who is not in the community, but as an outsider, to hear those motives. I deal with a number of boards and colleges, whether it's presidential searches or retreats, and every board has different needs, obviously. And every time a new member comes on, it's a whole different board. But some boards need intervention. Some have blocks of votes, 4 and 3 or 5 and 2. And sometimes there's a lot of issues going on with boards. I have to tell you, and I've known this board now for off and on for at least 25, 30 years while I was in administration. And I think you're in one of the best spots you've ever been in terms of dynamics. One of the things I heard from all of you when I talked to you was these are good people. They have Del Mar College at their heart, and they represent a really diverse group of backgrounds and not just ethnic diversity, but also diversity of experience. So it's really an attribute. So one way that we want to do this is to take a look at, let's see if I can do it this way. Okay, so one of the first things we want to do is recognize the gifts and charisms that you bring. So I handed you, each one should have a 2-sided handout, and all 9 regents are listed. And if Susan and Mary could get me theirs, I've already got Libby's. So what I would like you to do is circle your name or identify who you are if you're doing this remote, or I'll know because I'll see your email. And what are your gifts, charisms that you think you bring to this board? What's something that's sort of unique? And then these can be just individual words. They don't have to be long narrative sentences. And then do the same for each other region. And then I'm going to collect those and I'm going to read them, because usually one of 2 things happens. Coach, you need a pen?
For regents who would like, if you text me the individual words, I'll text them to Dr. Holda, and he can read the others first, and then we'll bring yours in later. So, or they can email Dr. Holda.
Whatever works for the other 2, for Susan and Mary. Okay.
I'm sorry, who did you say to send it to?
Well, it's up to you. You can either text them to Mark, and then he'll give it to me, or you could email me. I sent you an email this morning with the form.
Right. Okay.
Either way, I'll check my email here in a minute. So your gifts, charisms, contributions, and those of each other person. While you're doing that, what happens a lot of times is that it's affirming to see that other people recognize in you the gifts you see in yourselves. And then the other thing that happens is that sometimes people see things in you that you don't see in yourself. So let's see how this materializes. If you'll take just a minute or 2 to complete that, and then I'll collect those. For all the public who are watching remote, there's going to be a couple 3-4 minutes here of some really dead time. So just sort of bear with us as they go through this exercise. Okay, while Hector's finishing, I don't want him to feel rushed. I'll start with Hector. I'm gonna talk about you, Hector, what other board members see in you, and you can keep writing if you want, okay? Or let me know whenever you're ready for me to collect yours. So these are just in any order, and they're going to stay anonymous, of course. Hector, he cares about the community. He has a heart for the students. He is kind. He's always greeting with a smile. The students are at the very center of the things in which he's involved. deep roots in the community, is the champion for the students, dedicated to student interests. Again, advocate for the student, community-driven, quiet leadership qualities. He has a deep, caring heart. He is all about the students. Coach always thinks about the students. He is characterized by his compassion for them. He wants students to succeed. He appreciates transparency. Longtime advocate for student learning. Truly interested in student success, affordability, availability of financial aid for students. Again, concern for students. So you see the theme that many of you identify with you, Hector. So you're seen as a person that has a real heart for the students.
If I may say something, I really appreciate that. Really, really appreciate that. That's what they see about me. But then it's been my life, you know. I've done it forever. And one of the things that I wrote here, I said that the gift that I have was not a gift that just, no, my dad gave me that gift because he used to do the same thing. Always working with people, helping them, you know. Even when he passed away, there was a man there in the hospital, and he said, "Do you have something to do with that man?" I said, "That's my dad." And he said, "He saved me." You know, he used to go to jails and talk to him and stuff. So it's not something, it's just like that gift is something that's just passed on to me. And that's what I do. But that's all my family does too. But I want everybody to know in the board here that what was being said there is very warming. It really hit me in the heart. And I appreciate everybody.
Great. Okay, I'm going to keep going with this. And Hector, you keep writing, and then I'll integrate yours into this. So it'll be easier for me if I start at the top and just work my way down. So Carol, a longtime community advocate, strong PR skills, very in tune with workforce needs, business and industry, knows the local political atmosphere very well, years at the CCISD board. She knows the strengths and weaknesses of local education. A great leader, treats everyone equally, well respected, very organized. Great leadership capabilities developed through years of community service, business understanding from running her own business, and great PR knowledge that she brings to the college. Utmost professionalism, community college policies and procedures knowledge, patience, ability to crystallize discussions for the board. Creates a great atmosphere for the Del Mar Regents, has leadership qualities, organizational skills, confident, high community involvement, great organizational skills, good communicator, knows how to facilitate a meeting and keep things moving. So those are comments that your Regents see in you, Carol. Gabe, history and a depth of knowledge, commitment, confidence, real leadership skills, deep experience in the community. He's a great listener. He's very knowledgeable about the college. He's in touch with the local community. He always has Del Mar in his heart. He has a historical knowledge of the community and the college. He's an enthusiastic advocate for Del Mar College. He has a deep knowledge of the community. Again, a lot of experience, deep knowledge of Del Mar and the community. Again, historical knowledge, enthusiastic advocate for Del Mar College, a real cheerleader for the college. He's in touch with the local community. He tries to be a bridge between the college and the community. So some themes there that your fellow regents see in you, Gabe. Nick, a strong community advocate, very strong leadership skills. Went from being a Del Mar student to a doctor. He's the model of what success can be for a Del Mar student. He knows the local community. He's very respectful. He is above all a listener. He listens very well before responding. He's extremely friendly. He may not talk a lot, but when he does, everyone listens. Community-driven, organizational skills, service, leadership, very discreet, very kind, very humble, not full of himself at all. He's a real advocate. He has a lot of community connections, a lot of dedication, is always professional. And deep roots in the community, above all dedicated to Del Mar, and he brings a medical practitioner perspective to the board that is sometimes needed. So Nick, that's what your regents see in you. Are you finished, Hector? And as well, heart for the kids, a leader in the community, has a long history of community leadership and involvement. Okay. Mary, very knowledgeable. Her heart's in the right place. She has great higher ed experience, really intelligent, asks questions from a higher ed perspective. She really knows board governance, is a good leader, very experienced, and brings a lot of educational background. Brings great experience from TAMUCC, always seems to say the right thing. Very good in strategic planning. She has deep roots in the community. She also understands some of the state organizations that Del Mar has to answer to. Good communication background, and she is a big picture thinker. She knows college administration. She understands the boundaries, understands details that many of us would not consider. Very versed in all of higher ed, does her homework, and is a dedicated board member. So, Mary, that's what the regents have said about you. Libby, great journalistic integrity, always advocating for the less fortunate, has good experience in the for-profit, nonprofit worlds. She values education and Del Mar. She worked her way up from a reporter to running the local paper. She's an analyzer. She looks at the issues before reaching a conclusion. Love her communication skills, very professional. Very broad community connection, deep community relationships from her previous positions in the community and current position in the community. Thoughtful, actually very courageous in decision making. Good organizational skills, a true leader. Business acumen, leadership skills, communicates well, community connections, and also has an eye on how the community views the college. Very well known because of the person that she has been with the community and what she does now. She really has a goal to help everyone succeed. That's what your colleagues say about you, Libby. Ed Bennett, strong accounting background, values education, wants to bring the college to all that need an education, brings good fiscal analysis at times to the college board that they might not otherwise think about, deals with facts, not emotions, good accounting background, interest in assuring fiscal accountability, is willing to ask questions, not afraid to cast a dissenting vote. So he's not taking a trip to Abilene. Very kind, respectful, brings attention to details, and asks questions that some of us would not think about. Another one, brings valuable experience that none of us have, dollar sign, dollar sign, dollar sign. Community driven, advocate for students and faculty, deep experience. Financial acumen, very respectful. Knows his stuff when it comes to the financial issues of the college. He brings a lot of knowledge in areas that we might not think about, and how we use our revenue, our resources. So Ed, that's what your colleagues said about you. Very thematic. Elva, no question that her greatest gift is her heart is in the right place. She's very honest and sincere. When she talks about the college, the kids, the staff, she has educational experience, kindness, respect, deep history and knowledge of the college and the community, comes from an education background, understands public school environments, an advocate for students, a leader, very knowledgeable about appropriate board governance, always exudes confidence. Good educational background, understands K-12 intimately, very compassionate and supportive. Again, background in K-12, life experiences, knowing the importance of education, has roots in the community, is always diplomatic. Compassionate. Again, years of education administration. She knows where the students are coming from and what they need. Strong leadership skills, extensive background in education. She does extensive studies on board agenda and is always dedicated to professional development, lifelong learning, and continuing education. So, and you all will have to just decide how closely these descriptions match you. Susan, great board member, valued legal background, very analytical. Board member, is very good on policy issues. Good legal knowledge, not afraid to ask hard questions, but she always does it diplomatically. As an attorney, she understands, watches different sides of the college operations and its presentations, and looks at both sides of presentations. So easy to get along with, Susan. Love her. Look up to Susan when we are dealing with anything that might get into a legal matter or very analytical. She has leadership skills. She's not afraid to voice her opinion. She has deep community involvement. She's an advocate for students, faculty, and the college. She exudes confidence. Legal background, quickly digests information, is highly professional and ethical. She's balanced, has clarity of thought. She can manage difficult conversations. Her gift is the knowledge that she brings to the board in many phases of its operations, not just the students, but everything that has to do with the betterment of the community. Let's see if I have one more. Yes, and she can be a mediator in various discussions. So those are the feedback that you have for each other. And I did look at yours that you circled yourself, and I didn't read what you identified yourself. I was more concerned with what the others said about you, but in many cases, what you self-identified lined up very closely with what you heard. My question before we move to the next slide real quickly here is, did anyone hear anything that may have surprised them or that they did not recognize in themselves?
What surprised me was that almost everybody had the same opinion of each other. I mean, of each board member. It was pretty consistent. So that's what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
The qualities that we see in the board members.
Mm-hmm. Some very deep themes: love of Del Mar, deep roots in the community, lots of relationships, areas of expertise, a sense of the history of the institution. But I think the one theme that I heard the most was cares about the students, the passion for the students. And that, you know, that is really what this whole operation's about. So we're not having to bring board members along to be passionate for the mission of the college and the impact on the community and what you're doing for students.
So that I heard out of it, a little bit different, deep community connections in all 9 of us,
yeah,
but in different ways.
Yes.
And so while any one of us, you know, has folks that we listen to and that we interact with on a regular basis, all 9 of us together probably have a pretty good breadth of the community represented around this table. And so I think that's really helpful for us to listen to each other as much as we listen to the folks that we interact with outside of this boardroom, and recognize that that is indeed the role that we play here as elected officials, is to bring whoever our supporters are, whoever we identify as our constituents, and the folks that we interact with, that any one of us does not represent the whole. The 9 of us, I think, do a pretty good job of representing the whole. And I think that's the beauty of the system and the way it was designed. And I think it's a real attribute to each one of us that we all recognize the community connections that each of us have.
Just to piggyback on that, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so when the board is functioning as a board representing the students' needs and the needs of the community, it really has some strength. So a couple of these slides I'm going to go through fairly quickly because I want to get to one sort of capstone slide before we take our break. And so let me move my things here. So just a couple thoughts on teamwork. A group of individuals with diverse skills, we've already talked about that just now, and diverse roles, who align their energy and efforts to achieve a common purpose. So while we may not always agree on the way to get there, the goal will be that the board agrees where they want to go. Real teams don't emerge unless individuals on those teams take risks involving conflict, trust, interdependence, and hard work. Now, this is a tricky slide because many boards take the safe route and at times are a little hesitant to take a risk. So you probably are all familiar with ropes courses and things like that, where one person's walking on a beam and another team member's holding a rope, and certain groups do that type of thing. And I was involved at one point with a leadership team at the college. I wasn't president yet. I was a dean of admissions and registrar, and I was in a meeting and someone had suggested that we go ahead and have that exercise. And the dean of the Longview Center says, well, if the dean of Occ Ed gets up there on a beam, I'm going to let go of the rope. So you know, that's sort of where we were at that time. Those two had a natural competition going on and a lot of conflict. But that is part of that risk-taking, where people are willing to build the trust that's there, and that trust is at different levels. And we'll talk this level. you trust each other, you really do. And the question is, what would be that next level of trust that could be developed? I don't know that yet. I mean, what would be some actions or examples where the board could show more interdependence and more trust? My wife was a basketball coach for 17 years. She coached at White Wright High School, North Mesquite High School, women's basketball, and then she actually played at Tyler Junior College and SMU. And then she coached at Temple and at Kilgore, where we met, actually. And so with her players, sometimes she'd have them hold their arms and say, hold your arms as high as you can. And then she'd say, now reach a little higher. And in almost every case, there was more room. So a lot of times when boards are high functioning and performing well, there's a stasis that sets in. Things get comfortable. Comfort is good. And yet, one of the challenges for a high performing board such as you all is to say, what would be that next level of improvement? And I think as we roll into the self-evaluation this afternoon and the plan for tomorrow, I'm really looking forward to that, because I've been really poring over your self-evaluation results and the comments that were made and all the notes that I took while we talked. And I do think there are quite a few things that can be done to even increase the teamwork here. Real quickly, effective teams do engage in these behaviors. They agree on a clear purpose, goals, commitment toward a common purpose, dedication to continual progress and improvement. Don't get comfortable. Utilize diverse skills and knowledge of the members. Engage in open communications. They don't hold back, but are respectful. They follow positive team ground rules, codes of conduct, best practices, and they understand the very nature of a board, that the board can only act as a whole. And so even tomorrow, when we get into the board CEO relationship, that it's tough for a CEO to try to serve 9 masters. But if the board is together on their goals for the CEO, then it's much simpler for a CEO to follow one board rather than 9 individuals wanting 9 different pathways. This next quote, there's an interesting book and I've got an extensive book list for people that like to read. And if the board would like to have a copy, I'll get those to Natalie and she can share them with the board. There's probably 30, 40 books on there that cover everything from marketing to making things happen, to influence, to higher ed. And some are just really cool books like The Art of Possibility by Xander and Xander, and a number of really Influencer, The Power to Change Anything. So some really, really interesting books. But this book, I had to read leadership training for upcoming potential higher ed administrators in Missouri. We had to read The Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown. And it's the story of the 1936 gold medalists in rowing. And it was right during the time when Nazi Germany was hosting the Olympics in Berlin, and the whole dynamic that was going on with Hitler. And but it's a fascinating book. And one of the quotes that I included today is, it's hard to make the boat go as fast as you want it to go. The enemy is the resistance of the water, because you have to displace the amount of water equal to the weight of the men and equipment. But that very water is what supports you, and the very enemy is your friend. So is life. The very problems that you must overcome also support you and make you stronger in overcoming them. So my wife is now a licensed professional counselor dealing with trauma, primarily clients who have trauma and dissociation. And we don't watch a lot of movies or see a lot of movies, but we had gone one time, this is a number of years ago, to see the 100-Foot Journey, I think is what it was called. It's the story of an Indian family that there's ethnic turmoil and they leave, they land in London, they don't like it, they move to France. The mother was killed. She was a fantastic cook, and she taught her son a lot of how to cook with spices. And their car loses its brakes, and so it looks like it's going to be a disaster. And they get to the bottom of the hill, and where they land, they're there. And the dad says, this is where we need to start a restaurant. There's an old abandoned building. and his kids think he's lost his mind. And it's 100 feet away from a 2-star French restaurant. And so there's this whole conflict between the Indian restaurant and the lady that runs the French restaurant. And eventually she hires the son to work in her restaurant. And he takes them up to being a 3-star restaurant. And then he goes to Paris. And then I won't tell you the rest of the story in case you want to watch the movie. It's a delightful movie. And so, but at every juncture there appeared to be, it's the end. It was the door that opened them to the next level. The brakes went out on their car. They had nothing. It landed them in the place where they opened a restaurant. They had a conflict with the other lady that was there, and that got resolved, and she ended up hiring him. That, where he had appeared to be the big challenge to her in the past, now he was the ticket for her to get to be a 3-star restaurant. When he left for Paris, you know, it looked like that's the end again. So my wife's point was, that she got out of the movie, was sometimes right when we see something, we think, oh, this is horrible. It becomes that moment where we open the door to something else. So in one sense, COVID-19 may be one of those doors, you know? We don't know yet what kind of changes in society, in function, in the business community, in higher education are going to be lasting, and which of these are temporary. But we certainly have learned to do things much differently. And for many people, it may appear to be sort of the end of things, but what has it opened up? I don't know the answers to that. Well, so this idea on team building is that a lot of times when we face as boards some real tough challenges, and I think some of those are going to come, the question's going to be, how does that become the door? How does it become the water? You know, the enemy that you have to displace, but it's that upon which you ride. This other quote, harmony, balance, and rhythm. They're the 3 things that stay with you your whole life. Without them, civilization's out of whack. And that's why an oarsman, when he goes out in life, he can fight it. He can handle life. That's what he gets from rowing. Harmony, balance, rhythm. I wish I had more harmony, balance, and rhythm in my life in general, you know, because I don't. I would say I have harmony. I know that. And I probably have some rhythm, but I've never been really good at balance. And Mark will understand what I'm talking about. Sometimes you get in that CEO position, and my wife would say to me, you know, I'm just your mistress. You're married to Kilgore College, you know. So it can be overwhelming. And so as board members, you keep your balance too. This is the slide I want to spend just a little bit of time on, and it may be hard to read from where you are, but, and I don't know that this is a valid model, so let me put that disclaimer out there, but the author of this was an employee of Procter & Gamble, George Cherrier, and he developed the COGS ladder, which was a model of group growth, and it's used in a lot of the business world. So he identified 7 stages or different stages of group process or teamwork. And what is here right now is a modified version of that, which was called the Tuckman model, but it used these 5 stages: the polite stage, the why we're here stage, the power stage, the cooperation stage, and the esprit stage. And so his theory was that teams start, they get acquainted, sort of figuring out how the group's going to work, what are the structures, etc. Then they move to the here's why we're here. They share objectives and goals. The group goals and objectives are pretty much defined, and the identity is still, the group identity may be somewhat low. There is some increase in risk-taking among the members. Now, I don't know if this next one has validity or not, and it's what he identified as the power stage, where groups sort of jockey to see who will have the influence. And in some boards, depending on the board culture, there may have been more power. I don't want to say fights or battles, but power moves. And so sometimes in a board, depending on who's the chair, that can come from the atmosphere of the chair of the board. So I have worked with boards where one or two or three groups really try to get their way, you know, and that's some of that power struggle. The cooperation stage is where individual defenses are let down, barriers come down, and the group functions more cohesively. Openness and trust is established, resources are used effectively, and leadership is shared. And then finally, that esprit stage that he defines as members of the group accept each other, they work well together, spirits are high, cliques are absent, and there's a huge degree of loyalty to the group. So not just to the organization, but to the group as a group. If a new member joins the group at this point, there might be a regression to one of the earlier stages. So what I wanted to do was take about no more than 5 minutes and just see where your assessment of board maturity is, and it can be different. I mean, you don't all have to agree that you're at the same stage, but where do you see yourselves? I mean, I know you're not at the polite stage because you've moved beyond that, and I honestly believe you're past the why we're here stage, which is just simply functioning, but you at least agree on mission and vision. So I don't know if you've ever gone through a power stage, either in the past or, well, I think you have, because I know some of your former board members. So I do think in your history, there at least was a board member or two, maybe, but one or two who went through that power stage trying to have their way and their influence. But I'd just appreciate to hear, where do you see yourselves right now?
Well, one thing I don't see, and I think it occurs in a lot of other boards, some board members may have a personal agenda. And that's one thing I can say positive about this board, that everybody works for the good of the college and nobody really fights for a certain agenda or a certain project or anything like that. So that's a good thing.
Okay. Any other thoughts, please?
I kind of like agree with Gabe. I don't see ourselves at the power stage at all.
Okay.
I think I saw that when I was working with the different ISDs. You know, there was a lot of competition amongst the board members. But here, I do not see.
Okay.
I do not see that.
Okay.
I think we have to put the 7 stages in perspective. I'm seeing cooperation stage, you know, strongly.
Okay. Any other thoughts, Libby, Mary, or Susan?
I would put us in the cooperative stage and with occasional views of the esprit stage.
Got it. Okay.
This is Mary. Yeah, I would say the cooperation stage and occasionally at the esprit stage.
Okay, good.
I agree with that.
Okay, good. I just wanted to get a sense of where your self-perception was. And so why don't we do this? It's almost 10:30, and we'll take a 15-minute break. And then at 10:45, we will get back together and continue with the next step. So you may want to get up, stretch, take a break, socially distance. Maybe wear your mask if you're going to be near each other. Okay, break for 15 minutes.
I think we can convene at 10:45.
Thank you, Carol. So this next section is sort of in 2 parts, and there's a series of slides, and I'm going to go through those pretty quickly because you are aware of a lot of this and you exhibit the behavior of a lot of it. But there is one thing I want to try to do. Now, those of you who are remote might not, I don't know if you can see, let's see. Okay, yeah, you can. Okay. So I want you to do this. So take a look at me for a minute, and take your thumb and your second finger and make a circle. Okay. Now take that circle and put it on your chin. Your chin. How many of you put it on your cheek? You know? So yeah, my chin is relocated. So when my wife and I were teaching parenting resource classes for court-ordered people going through a divorce and had kids under 18 in the county, they require that they go through this so you see how you followed what I did, not what I said. The public, the college community, the faculty, staff, administration, they watch what you do. So no matter what you say, it's what you really do that they zero in on. So, and I'll come back to this later, okay? So I was talking to Christina, and this can be something we can talk about later this afternoon or tomorrow morning, but I'm going to give an example. So many boards, community college boards in the nation, have slowly moved to making student success a key part of the college function and a key part of their board function. Because historically, boards met much more infrequently, were much smaller. For years at Kilgore College, the 14 years that Dr. Watson was president, he had 4 board meetings a year, and he never had a dissenting vote in 14 years. He would go around to each board member individually, and if he saw he was going to have a no vote, then he'd pull it. Then there was an era in the, I would say, in the early 70s, where many administrators used what was called the mushroom philosophy as it dealt with their board, and that was keep them in the dark and feed them manure. And so boards often didn't really know what was going on, and there wasn't that level of accountability, honestly. And so as boards began to mature, they became more involved in maybe 2 areas, fiduciary, fiscal primarily, as it related to taxes and expenditures. And I would say the second area might have been buildings, you know, expansion, capital improvements, but they were not rooted in instruction. Many of you probably have known a school superintendent or two who was a really good blue collar superintendent, could figure out how to do the bus routes to get maximum state funding, could do all this kind of stuff, but didn't know anything about curriculum. Is that correct, Elva? So many community college boards had started to get on the bandwagon, whether it was student success, pathways, achieving the dream, developmental ed, etc. But it was sort of out there and not something that really was the priority. And so boards continue to move. So this is an example of putting your circle on your cheek where people watch what you do. So an example, and we can get into this tomorrow morning even in more detail, is to think about the things that the board does that send a message, no matter what you say you do, okay? And this is not meant to be critical. At this point, it's meant to be examine behavior and examine function and say, this is the message we're really sending. An example, a lot of boards now will do the Pledge of Allegiance, moment of silence, read the mission statement, and then the very next thing is they will do one of 2 things. A lot of times they'll have a quick 5-minute student success report right at the beginning of the meeting. The idea is if student success is the most important thing we're dealing with, why don't we hear it first? Before we do a consent agenda, before we do approving the minutes or whatever we do. That could be a report not only data driven, but also event or initiative driven. So how is the move toward 2 8-week classes going, and how many sections do we have, and what percentage is that now, and how many students have we enrolled in it? And at the end of the semester, did we increase enrollment because of that strategy, and did we see more student retention and completion because of that strategy? So that's just an example. I'm not trying to get into that discussion right now. I'm just using that as an example of how boards can look at everything, how their meeting is structured, and it's not just the words that they use. It's how they function really makes a difference. So you all do well. You're much more intact than some of the boards I've worked with. So that's one reason that I want to zip through these slides fairly quickly, because I don't think I need to spend as much time on those as really diving into some of the what I would call meat and potatoes about where the board's lane is. Boundaries are helpful. My wife and I were on a cruise, and we were doing Dunn's River Falls in Jamaica, which could never do in the United States because it's not safe. But you know, you're going up this waterfall, guides are leading up, and all this water is rushing down at you. And if you think that was scary enough, it was nothing compared to the bus ride over to the falls, because the bus driver's going 90 to nothing, and I'm looking down and there's no guardrail, you know, in Jamaica, and it's like, oh my gosh. So boundaries really do make a difference. We do another exercise in this parenting class where we have a whole page of numbers. It's all random, and we say, circle number 1 first, and then number 2, find it on the page, and number 3, and number 4, and then do number 5, and keep going and see how high you can get. We do it for about 45 seconds. They usually somebody might get to 16, 17, 18, find them on the page. You know, every once in a while you get someone gets to 20. Then we hand the same page out, except now it's in a quadrant. So it's four boxes. We tell them number 1 is over here, 2 is over here, 3 is down here, 4 is here. And you're going to keep going in sequence. Once they see that there's a pattern and they know which boundary to look in, which box, they're up to 30 in half the time. In other words, they can find their number much more quickly because there's a pattern and there's a boundary. It's within that box. So we use that as one example to say boundaries really free up people. My wife tells me that my problem always as college president was I didn't have enough boundaries. You know, that I would do things that people asked me to do, and they felt free to call at any time or ask me to show up on Christmas Day to award a scholarship to somebody, you know, that type of thing. And I did. So her point was when people set boundaries, boards have boundaries, administration has boundaries, and everybody knows what those are, they function better. So we will get into a lot of that as we move forward.
Dr. Holder.
Please.
Going back to what you said real quickly.
Yeah, please.
About the superintendents.
Yes,
They didn't know about curriculum. Well, there was a time, and I don't know if you will recall this, when our principals came from the coaching world.
Yes.
No offense, Hector. But, you know, most of our school principals were coaches.
Sure.
And they became principals. Knew nothing about curriculum, but they were very good with discipline.
Yeah. In fact, there was a pathway while you're talking about that, Elva, which is true, where you coached, you moved up in the coaching ranks, then you might have become an advisor or counselor. And from that, some of them become assistant principal and did all the discipline, moved to principal. And there still are, at least in East Texas, a fair number of superintendents who were former coaches. You know, so they went all the way to superintendents. Very true. Yeah. Okay, so there's a whole shopping list that you gave me when we talked. And so let's see, I'm having trouble getting this to advance again. Let's see. Okay, so pretty quickly, key indicators of an effective board: commitment, leadership, partnership, and understand legal responsibility. devote time and attention, effectively participate in making policy decisions, work closely with the president, and know the essential information that you need to know. Board members have a fiduciary responsibility. That fiduciary responsibility doesn't just mean financial, but you have a legal responsibility in many realms that go far beyond just simply a. And so knowing from time to time, having college counsel remind you of what the breadth of those are is very helpful. And by the way, part of the ground rules I should have said is I get going. And if you need to say something, interrupt me or raise your hand or just start talking, okay? Because otherwise you won't get a chance during some of this type of section. Boards ideally should have organizational goals, objectives, job description, expectations, tasks, decisions on structure. I'm going to talk about that for a second. So I don't know when's the last time the board did a complete review of all of its written documents, but periodically, say once every 3 years or so, it's very healthy to have the board either appoint an ad hoc committee to do a review and bring recommendations to the full board, or just have the full board do a review. And I'm not even sure how many documents you have. Some boards have standards of good practice, they have bylaws. I know you have ethics statement because I heard that at your meeting that I watched last week. But again, when have those been reviewed and taken a look at? And I don't know what those are, but every board has a different mix of documents. And so whatever that mix is, and the board might look at when was the last time that we did a pretty comprehensive review of those, and what would be the method that we would like to choose for redoing that a little bit. I know, and we can talk about this later this afternoon, I know that a few board members have expressed the fact that they would like to see the ethics statement reviewed and have a chance to do that. And that could again be an ad hoc committee approach. I don't want to tell you how to do that. I do want to talk for a minute about the decisions on structure. There is no perfect way to do things except what works best for you. So about 50% of the college boards that I'm familiar with do function as a committee of the whole. The other 50% have some type of committee structure, and those structures are all over the screen. So here's part of where I'm coming from on this. I know that you've done both, and sometimes there's discussion about which is the best way to accomplish your mission. We might spend a minute or two talking about this. Kilgore College, in its history, was a committee of the whole. And then a president came in, a former president, and he really wanted a robust committee structure. So there was a finance committee, a personnel committee, a property committee, the audit committee, one that dealt with property acquisition and maintenance of the facilities, physical plant, one that was supposed to look at policy and governance on a regular basis. So they had about 6-7 committees. And those committees would meet, do some deep dives, really get into some things. They would come to the formal board meeting and give a very brief report and say, we studied this and here's the recommendations for the board. The problem was the rest of the board members wanted to know all the other information. So it's like, well, if we're going to retrace it every time we come back, then there's really no reason to do it twice if we're going to do the same thing. Another thing that sometimes happens is that Kilgore College had an executive committee of the board. We had 3 officers, chair, chair-elect, and secretary. We didn't have a first and second as you do. And so about 10 days before the board meeting, that group would meet, go over the agenda, try to really do it. And the problem was we were drifting a little bit where we were almost functioning like a mini board meeting, getting into this is the way this needs to go, and here's more information, and staff were starting to give reports and this kind of thing. And we had to, what that was creating among other board members was this issue of they're sort of functioning like the board and we feel left out. So that was a problem. So basically what the college did was go back to functioning as a committee of the whole. Alamo, I'm going to use them as an example. They have a lot of committee meetings. They had members who really wanted to know everything going on in those meetings. So they ended up now posting every committee meeting, and basically the full board shows up just about for every committee meeting. So, and there are a lot of them, believe me. So it's a very time-consuming operation. Other boards will appoint ad hoc committees to do specific tasks, such as review the bylaws and written documents, or review the ethics policy and make a report. Or in some cases, when people have a bond pass, they'll actually create a ad hoc committee to monitor the expenditures of that bond. Everybody does something differently. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just saying that there are different structures. They both have their merits, and boards have to figure out what is the structure that best serves their needs. So any thoughts on that? I mean, I know in talking to all of you individually, I did get some different feedback where I heard that on the one hand, I think we would benefit from a more active committee structure to get deep into some stuff, not deep into administrative lanes, but where the board should be. And I've also heard from some of you that says we really function better as a whole because what you described is what we had gone through in the past when we had committees. People wanted to be informed. So any thoughts on that one?
I agree with you, Dr. Holda. We used to have lots of committees, and part of the problem was that if the committee met at 8 o'clock, okay, or 9 o'clock, let's say, our meetings were not until 1 o'clock, so we'd have to drive. And I live in Siberia. I live way out there. And I would drive for the committee meeting at 8 o'clock, and then I had nothing to do between 9, 10 o'clock, and then I had to wait around until 1 o'clock. So I didn't like that. And also, you know, what you said about the committees, there was 3, maybe 4 of us in that committee, and then we had to share the information at the board meeting, which was a lot of repetition. We wasted a lot of time. So I love what we're doing now, just the committee as a whole, because we all hear the same thing.
But we do set up ad hoc committees as needed.
Yes.
Okay.
Done that before. Policy review.
I think Gabe and I are the only ones that remember the committee meetings, right?
Yeah.
One of the subjects that's going to come up here real quickly, which I heard from a number of you, was the need for the board to really focus on some big strategic decisions that will be confronting the college and the community, and that sometimes the volume of stuff you're asked to look at keeps you from going into that deep dive that could create a time for real, true, deep, long-range visioning, strategic involvement. And I have some ideas of how the board could do that if they keep their current structure. And again, that's totally sits with you at the board level.
Before we go to Flora, I want to go back to the slide before and just make sure that we've heard from a couple of board members about the committee issue. There are a couple things that you said that I've made some notes on that I personally really like. The idea that we create as part of, I think I mentioned this to you, Dr. Holda, that the board had desired last year to do some more policy review work, and that we consciously made the decision to put that on hold for a few months while staff was doing some organizational work with our policies.
Yep.
So we want to bring that back on track. I think as a part of that, I like the idea that we are going to create a review of our own bylaws, ethics, and other board documents and put that into that policy review system. So I heard you say that as an example, and I wanted the board to know that I like that idea, and I think we bring that discussion, whether or not there's consensus on the board, but we bring that discussion back in our policy review discussion that I think is going to happen in the June or July board meeting. I think I recall from our agenda planning that we're looking to bring that policy review discussion back in June or July. So I like that particular piece. I would like to hear more from other board members, though, about the committee piece to make sure that we all are on the same page. So is there anybody from the GoToMeeting, our virtual participants who have an opinion on our committee of the whole versus additional committee functions? Nope.
Yeah, Carol, I tend to like the hybrid we've had, which I agree with what Elvis said. It was sort of a waste of time. Some people were feeling out of the loop and some people were feeling like they were going in loops multiple times. So it works, I think, as a committee of a whole, with some exceptions when we need to have a specific committee. I think it's worked.
Does the board have an audit committee? No,
it's the whole.
Of the whole? Okay.
We go through the audit process as a whole. But the other thing is, too, is just remind everybody that the workshops is where we take the deeper dives prior to the board meetings. And I think whenever there's not a workshop, we tend to stretch out staff reports and get really molecular.
Yeah.
We're still going through I think in some cases, some of those presentations are very overly informative. They're very, very granular and so forth, and probably more suited for the workshops. That'll help. But that is another piece in there that we haven't talked about today.
Okay.
I think Regent Bennett has a comment, then I'll come back to Dr.
I do. On that audit committee, I feel like I get a cursory review of the audit. And it may be because of my background. I've got a lot more interest in the details involved in an audit, and most people don't share that. And that's why I would like to see an audit committee. I'd like to be a member of that audit committee. Because it's a big thing to me, and I have a lot of interest in it. And in the public meeting, it may get boring for some people. I actually enjoy the stuff.
Yeah. It's okay but it's okay for one person to enjoy it and another not to. And again, I'm not, you know, I'm not making recommendations of what you should do. I think that part of what sometimes is healthy to do is, and I think this is on a totally different subject, Carol, but the Community College Association of Texas Trustees, I think a neat project for them would be to try to survey the members about different practices, to just see where you fall in terms of normative behavior. It doesn't mean you have to change. It doesn't mean you have to be just like everybody else, but it would be interesting to see, I think, statewide for many boards where their practices do line up with accepted practice and where they don't. And the one reason I asked that question was about audit committee, because the boards I have dealt with, for the most part, a lot of times do, and I've sat in on those audit meetings with the auditors and the audit committee, and then at one point administration gets up and leaves the board in there by themselves, so that if the auditors see anything that they want to say directly to the board, they do. And it is pretty detailed. It's a couple-hour meeting just on a lot of the intricacies of the audit. So I'll give an example. There was a time when foundations were considered a discrete, unique component, and then that was removed from state rules and then put back in. And a lot of times there's rules that come from the state coming through the coordinating board that change the way the audit will appear. It might be in a different format. And sometimes if there are people that know what that means and are in on that, it can be helpful, but it is too much material for, if Elvis says, I don't want to hear all that, you know, it can run on a two-track basis. And I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying the audit is such an important piece. And often you wait to hear the auditors say, we're giving you an unqualified, clean opinion, and then everybody's fine, and they're not really looking at, some of the changes in some of the columns. So I'm not saying do it. I say follow what Carol is suggesting. As part of this total review of your bylaws and other written documents, it's a good time to look at other things that we do. So I was the Dean of Admissions and Registrars for 6 years. And about 2 months into that, I started developing alopecia areata, lose a circle of hair, another circle of hair, stress. Because back then, the state in the enrollment audit would penalize you. And if you had 2 errors, they extrapolated those errors out over your whole student population, and you could lose $200,000, $300,000 with 2 enrollment errors. So there was a lot of stress in that job. And the president at the time, one of the presidents, loaded a bunch of stuff on me because he didn't know where else to put it. So I was supervising the library. Well, the library director every year would send out a list of all of the periodicals in the library and say, check the ones you want to keep going. And they'd all come back all checked. So budget was a problem. So I said, let's do it differently. Next year, we're going to send them a list, say, we're getting ready to renew our periodical list. Send us the ones you want in the library. That list shrunk by 90% because people didn't just have a wish list, a checklist. So one of the tasks that might be good is look at all the information you get. I looked at your board packet before your board meeting, and there was a lot of stuff in there. I mean, you got, reports and vendors and $10,000 this and checklists. And and it was for a number of months because you hadn't met. So it was a thicker packet. And I thought, I wonder how many people have looked through that entire packet, So this might be a time too, as part of that policy review, Carol, would be where the board can say, let's step back and let's just sort of do an analysis. What are we really wanting? Not here's what you're getting, check the list, and you check it all. But instead, what do we really need for us to do our jobs? That would be an interesting exercise. Which reports do you as regents find helpful, informative, reasonable that you'd like to keep getting? That either helps you have a sense of accountability and or helps you stay informed to the level you want. Because I saw this when I was registrar. We'd say, time to do your fall class schedule. Turn it in so we can get the brochures printed and go live with the schedule. How many times did the fall schedule in this year look exactly like the fall schedule in the year before, and the year before, and the year before? Same thing with budget, Submit your budgets. They take what was in last year's budget, add a little bit to it, and submit it, So we are creatures of our culture where we start to create these habits, and it's like adding a room onto a house, then another room and another room and another room, and it finally doesn't make any sense. So a good exercise could be to just sort of step back and say, what do we really need here? I'm just suggesting that as long as you're going to look at, if you're going to do a policy review and sort of get things cleaned up, this could be a perfect time to sort of have that dialogue with administration on here's what would be helpful. Or we're getting this. One summary report that combines those 4 might be more helpful than where we are.
I'm going to stop you there. And I think Dr. Sherwood had a comment on our committee structure earlier. I want to make sure we get that before we move on.
Mary.
Yeah, thanks. I did want to say that I generally agree with the committee of a whole thing with the ad hoc committees as needed. But I would think it'd be good to explore the idea of the audit committee.
Thank you, Mary.
Any other comments on that before we move on from that topic? Thanks. Sorry, Dr. Holt.
No, please do. No, absolutely. This is the way I want this to work. And let me give an example on level of report. So we had a board member. He loved me. Thank goodness, because he had two worlds. You were either his friend. There are only two kinds of people in this world: friends and enemies. There's nobody in between. So I was a friend. I was a faculty member, and I got a call from this board member, and he said, "I need you to meet me up at the dry cleaners." I said, "Okay." So I was a faculty member still, okay? But the president had asked me to apply for the registrar's job, and I said, "No, I'm happy teaching music, and I don't see a reason to do it." And he said, "I don't want to hear that. Put in your application." So I did. So I get to the dry cleaners, and there's 4 board members there, and they're planning the whole meeting, how they're going to vote, who's going to make the motion, who's going to second. And they were asking me information that I didn't even have, because, and that was part of that good old boy network, the way things worked before people started looking at Open Meetings Acts and those kind of things. This would be 1989, 90. So this same board member always suspected people of doing the wrong things. And I would tell him, I said, "Sonny, that's because you've done those exact same things." So he was a big budget guy, which was okay. But so we created a summary report that sort of was the big overall report of where the total budget is: revenues, expenditures, and had about 5 categories, where student aid, Pell Grants, and those, and you know, where the state funds for the 8 elements of costs were going, et cetera, et cetera. Then we had a second report that was much more detailed, that had revenue, but it was summary. It wasn't each line item, and expenditures. We had another report that was the full budget line item for every single budget for that month. So art, travel, music, supplies, welding equipment. I mean, you take your pick, you know. He would go through and highlight those, and then at the board meeting, he'd spend 20, 30 minutes going through those line items, asking, what does this one mean and what's the variance? So the board chair asked him to highlight those and get with the CFO before the meeting so he could get all of his questions answered and not tie up the rest of the board. He wasn't going to do it. He liked sitting there doing that level of report, and the board members would just sit there with their heads down, and 10, 15 minutes later, just waiting for him to finish. And so, but there was an example of how, had he cooperated, and I still love the guy, but had he cooperated, it could have made the board functioning so much better, because of the 9 board members, 6 wanted the big aerial report. 2 of them wanted the next level, and he was the one that wanted the detail. But we were going to give it to him. There's no reason not to. It's just that there are ways to try to provide the information to folks. And here's where you got to be careful, because you don't want to be giving information to one board member that the rest of the board doesn't have if they feel like they need it. But on the other hand, that was a level of information that the rest of the board didn't think was in their wheelhouse. So that does partly spill into this next slide. Understand oversight responsibility. As I said earlier, boundaries are helpful. But if people don't know what the boundaries are, it creates a lot of stress and missteps. So clear understanding between administration and board on what are my limits, what are the boundaries, where do we all shake out is very important. You've done a good job with strategic planning. Some boards are totally clueless about the college strategic plan. It's some document sitting on a shelf and never has been looked at. And I went back and looked at a lot of your minutes and meetings, and you spent an entire year really working on that. You're doing board development right now. Boards, if this ends up, which I hope it will be, because I'm predisposed that it will be, but I'm hoping it will be a good retreat for you all. But if it is, if it's worthwhile, the board may want to consider an annual retreat. And sometimes that can have a certain focus where it's not like a workshop, but planning on a specific subject, but what is one specific aspect that a board might want to focus on? And again, student success, you know, you're on the precipice. You're about to get into it even more, as you'll see during lunch. And most of you expressed that to me, which I was really pleased that, you know, we want our KPI numbers. We want to know where we are. We want to see where we want to go. I was very pleased with that. Continuing, you know, communication, knowing your roles and responsibilities, professional development, board conduct, and that last one, process. So I'm going to get ahead of myself here for a second, and I can have a copy printed to hand to you or email to all of you tonight or later today or during lunch. I was telling Mark about this. I was doing a workshop for SUNY, State University of New York, Ulster Community College in near Poughkeepsie, New York. And when I was there, they had a lot of misunderstanding, and it's a unionized place too, with a real active union, collective bargaining. And so you're dealing not only with the head of the faculty senate, but you're dealing with the head of the union, and tough environment. I wouldn't want to be in it myself, but the president was working on this, and what he was developing was a matrix. So on the left-hand side of the matrix, which is my right, because you're looking at me this way, on the left-hand side of the matrix was different tasks, like approve the annual budget, approve the audit, well, the audit, annual budget, departmental budgets, hiring, firing, and it went all down the list, all sorts of activities that occur at a collegiate level. Across the top, there were columns: board, CEO, executive cabinet, deans, department chairs, faculty senate, staff association, faculty, community, and then there was a code. So like A was approve, D was decide, I was inform, R was recommend. So they had developed a code, and it took them, they had not finished it while I was there. They were working on it with administration, but it was administration and board working on it together. It took a lot of discussion because there was not total agreement. So where does the board make the decision? Where is it that they get information? Where is it that the president makes a recommendation, but the board makes a decision? And so as Mark and I were talking, I listened to his president's report last week at his board meeting, and he was talking about some strategies he's going to have to make to create this reserve fund moving forward for COVID contingency. Well, some board members may be thinking, maybe we should be involved in some of that decision making, and maybe Mark feels that some of that's in his wheelhouse, in his lane. So those are helpful discussions that we can go through today and tomorrow too, and use some examples, real examples. But what as part of that policy review, what the board may want to do is work with administration to create that matrix. And so everybody sees in front of themselves, okay, here's where I'm a decider, here's where I'm a recommender, and that helps faculty, staff, deans, directors, etc. also. So I've seen colleges, I'm going to use a budget example, I've seen colleges where moving money around within any of instruction, the board can get a report on it if they want for moves over $10,000, but basically they don't have any say-so in monies that were committed to instruction. But some boards want to know if you're moving money from student services to instruction. They certainly want to know if you're taking money out of reserves. And you can't touch Title IV funds, I mean, because they're restricted. So knowing, you know, where that is, that could be an issue where boards set thresholds. They say, anything above this, I want to know, you know. I'm going to give a totally different example. This boards, well, I'll give two. Boards may want to be the decider, and probably should be, for the policies that govern how much money you keep in reserves. If it's 2 months operating expense, 3 months, 4 months, whatever it is, that's definitely a policy decision. You're going to hear at noon when Christina talks about these thresholds and targets and data, and we'll get, sometimes I get ahead of myself, but then I'll come back to it. But while I'm on it, I'm going to talk about it. So the Carver governance model is very extensive, and I don't mean to oversimplify it, but the simplest way for boards to take care of their roles and responsibilities, and we'll get into this in more detail in a minute, is to think of a hallway. The door at the end of the hallway belongs to the board. It's the end target. It's the policy. The walls are the constraints within which administration has to walk. So we don't tell administration how many steps to take if they weave back and forth. They know what their limits are and they know what the target is, but the means to get there belongs to administration. So I'm going to give an example. So let's say that once some of these strategies are implemented, administration can provide you with some verifiable targets, not aspirational targets for student success. And so I'm going to just throw an example out. So let's say right now you're at about 18% graduation rate for the kids that entered in 2016 and graduated in 2019. And that number is actually pretty close. You're at about 18, 19%. An aspirational target would be, we would like to add 2% a year for each of the next 5 years and be at 24% or some number, 10% or 28%, whatever, in a 5-year period through 2024. Once you start to implement your strategies, those data can become much more refined. Those targets can become much more refined. Right now, they're just a number. But having the board affirm a set of institutional targets is an appropriate policy action of the board. You're not telling administration how to get there. They've already working on the strategies and all these types of things. But that's appropriate if you want to get to that level. What's not appropriate is to say, well, I think you need more advisors, and I think you need to move 75% of your classes to 8-week terms. And when we get into those management strategies, that's what administration and the college staff should be doing. You're certainly welcome to have an opinion, but it's hard to, it's hard sometimes for boards to be able to delineate where one picks up and the other lets off. While we're on board conduct, a couple things that are really tough. You are a bridge between the community and the college, no question. And you hear all of you describe how involved you've been in the community. So there are times where you can be valuable in communicating to the college staff and to the rest of the board where the community is. The tricky part is how to do that in a manner that doesn't appear to be taking off your trustee hat and putting on your citizen hat and then putting on your trustee hat. I'll give an example. So we have a fitness center at the college, and the showers were really nasty. They needed power washed and all this kind of stuff, and they did. That was a legit. But so someone who uses that shower in the facility calls a trustee, says that place is a mess. So trustee calls me, I'm president, says, hey, I'm just passing this on. I'm not telling you to do it, but you know, somebody passed this on. You may or may not be aware of it. That was the end of it. That's an appropriate way for a board member to communicate that. What gets a little trickier is I get a call from a board member who would say, so-and-so has applied for this position. They asked me to put in a good word for them. I know them, they're a good person, but I'm staying out of the hiring. You know, no harm, no foul. It's when you have a trustee calling and saying, so-and-so in the community needs a review of somebody's grade because the grade they got was inappropriate and they really need to have this grade to get in the nursing program. Or, I know so-and-so and I don't know why you wouldn't hire them. Or why are you keeping this person at adjunct status and not moving them to full-time status? You know? So if you ask a question and it's for information and you get your answer, or you're just simply doing your job to pass on what the community says, that's that's an appropriate role. What's not appropriate is when you begin to direct administrative staff to do certain things because a student or a faculty member told you. So remember that slide? It's not what we don't know that gets us. It's what we know for sure that just ain't so. So you might hear something from a community member and it's a concern, and because it's a concern of theirs, to them, it's reality. But those three questions, is it so? To what extent is it so? Why is it so? Is very valuable for board members to ask. So when we talk about board conduct, we don't want to use board conduct as a way to limit the freedom to do your job as a bridge between the community. That's a valuable role that you play. It's just tricky sometimes because some of what you are either asked to do or the way it is asked, administration sits there and the board has power. You know, we work at the pleasure of the board, CEOs. So when a board member calls and says, I need this, or I need this, or I need this, how does that feel, Mark? I mean, it's got a little more pressure than, you know. Yeah. So I'm not saying don't ask, but I'm recognizing when we talk about board conduct, that is a really tough spot to be in as a board member because you are trying to be a representative of the community. They elect you.
And I just say that right there is why there are no little things for me. Everything is big because this board is the reflection of the community. And to me, as a community college guy, I take that very, very seriously.
Yep. I had a board member, and I really did love a lot of my former board members. I mean, they were great people. He was a son of a sharecropper and ended up being a security officer at the local ISD. And back in the day, we had a classical music station at the college before we had to shut it down just for finances. And we had a buyer a Christian station that wanted it for like 8 times what we would have ever thought we could have sold it for. So, but he would call and put pressure for them to do bluegrass on the classical music station. And of course, the staff at the station just resisted, you know, and he was sort of relentless. And so eventually they did create a Saturday morning thing on variations on country music and that kind of thing. We're able to put some bluegrass in. But there was times where I had a board member who was a dyed-in-the-wool Aggie. He had a PhD in agriculture, and he was a brilliant researcher. And he wanted to pull funding from the band because of the march they were playing was the same one that UT played every week when they played. Seriously. So I know you're not in that arena. I'm glad, but I'm just using some examples. Common purpose, respect, cooperation, good board partnership with the CEO. We're going to talk about that tension in a little bit. Again, back to the formal documents. You know, is there a set of bylaws? Is there a board policy manual that goes beyond the bylaws? And do you even need one, but do you have one? Annual calendar that shows in January we do this, in February we do this, March we do this. Code of ethics, job descriptions for officers and parliamentary procedures. Okay, occasionally you might need to revisit that. I know you're doing annual president evaluation, and by the way, I want to compliment you on your board self-evaluation. Good instrument, a lot of rich feedback. It was very helpful for me to see that, and I applaud you. There are boards that I have worked with in the last 18 months who have never done a self-evaluation, ever. And they're doing their first ever one. Sachs has said very clearly, it is not sufficient for a board to do evaluation and then check the box and say, here, we did it. But now, just like institutional effectiveness affects the whole college, we have to show on a regular basis that we have developed a plan, assessed our progress on that plan annually, and then done a revised plan for the following year. So you have done that. I've looked at your goals for this last year and the things you've achieved, and that are checkmarked. Not all of them were, but you're at least definitely in compliance. There's no question. Again, this is very repetitive. Positive participatory climate, you have that. Rapport, manage group dynamics, provide feedback, celebrate progress, debrief, study complex issues, understand organizational culture. What does not work well? Saying nothing when intervention is needed, saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, repeating yourself over and over, saying things that favor one coalition or subgroup over another, or that are confusing or contradictory. So I do not sense that you are a board-dominated institution, nor do I sense that you are a staff-dominated institution. But what I want to spend a little bit of time on talking on is this dynamic tension that exists. Because if it is well balanced, think of it as a seesaw or teeter-totter, there's a pretty good amount of weight on either side that balances. And so each partner feels comfortable challenging the ideas. I'm not criticizing Mark here at all. I'm taking a real example that I think is true. So generally, I would say, based on the handouts I've seen and the amount of information I've seen, that administration does a pretty good job giving the board a lot of info before they're asked to vote on something. Now, the flip side of that is, and I don't know, you as a board will have to answer this for me. And I realize your last meeting was not normal. It was, you were doing video, you had some people here, and you had not had a meeting for a while, and so you were doing, there was a sort of catch up from previous meetings that were not held, and or you were approving a lot. So I think you had plenty of information. The question that I have is, was it too much in one meeting? Mark had a pretty long presidential report. He told me it's not usually that long. And I know you had a couple of reports you were having, Carol was having to move people on because it was bumping up against 4 o'clock, you know? And so that part of that tension is where board can feel comfortable to say and agree, we've gone a little too far here, you know? Let's sort of right the ship a little bit. I have heard that years ago, not this board, but that years ago, that when some of the staff presented, and if it were not a complete report or perceived to not have certain pieces of information in, staff felt rebuked a little bit or chastised for not being able to answer certain questions or not having addressed certain issues. So as I've talked to Mark and some of the staff, they have tried to compensate for that and have added more and more and more and more to some of those reports so as not to be caught wanting. I think that sometimes boards need a couple introductions and repetition. With all due respect to boards and you all, some of us work better in a Sesame Street environment. Today is brought to you by the letter A and the number 4. And then all through that program, you got the letter A and the number 4 over and over and over and over. But a lot of repetition. And so sometimes boards need an extra meeting or two to sort of get used to an idea, especially something big. And so this may sound like a criticism, Mark, and so I don't mean it to be. But in going back and looking at previous board meetings and that, I would take one example of where I don't think administration had teed up something for a board vote sufficiently. And I think a board does a good job for administration when they call a halt to something like that. So on the BSN program, I felt that there were some questions there that needed to be answered before the board could move to that next vote. And so that's where the board can help. I took a proposal to build a new student center to the board of trustees back in '97, and they didn't accept it. There were too many things that were not answered. And you know what? It was the best thing that ever happened, because it made me go back and I had to figure out about 6 or 7 things that I had not thought about or that I had made assumptions about. and we came back with a much stronger project, and we're able to build that student center.
So I want to stop here and give, we've heard these last several slides and kind of quick repetition, but I'd really like to hear if there's any questions or comments or feedback from the board on this balance and on this dynamic tension. Are there areas where you think we can improve? Are you comfortable with how it's been described? I want to make sure we have time to hear from board.
I appreciate that, Carol.
On each of these kind of major topics.
Yep, very good.
Any comments? Good. Yes, that's okay.
We're doing good. We're okay. We have that balance. I don't think anybody's overstepping the boundaries.
My one concern is that, again, the strength of a board that has deep community connections is when we come into the room, we come in with that perspective. And again, there's a good and bad side to that coin. I use the analogy when I'm talking to folks about different frames in which to look at a problem. It's like there's different doorways into the Harvin Center. And depending on which doorway you come in, you're going to see or participate in or observe different behavior. You might say, oh, the Harvin Center is just about kids eating pizza, or the Harvin Center is about the food pantry, or the Harvin Center is a back door into the restrooms, or the Harvin Center is a big hallway where all the student organizations have their meeting tables set up to try to get members. None of those things are wrong, but they're not the complete picture of what the Harvin Center is. And so this dynamic tension sometimes for me is that any one individual perspective is not wrong bringing that to the table, but we have to each own that we don't see 100% of what it is walking into the room. And so that ability to listen and to understand the group dynamic as a whole and to understand staff's perspective. I mean, we might think we know what goes on in a classroom, but we do not know what goes on in a classroom. We know what maybe went on in a classroom when we were in a classroom 30 years ago or more recent than that. If you happen to be taking a photography course, I know one of our regents took a photography course recently, but you know what went on in that one classroom. And so we really have to understand that balance between what staff is bringing us and what the professors and deans are bringing us and our own perspective. And that, I think that's really important for each of us to own and appreciate about the whole. So, yes, Mr. Bennett.
I do want to say one thing. It's my perception that our agenda is about 200 pages and normally. So I'm thinking that last one you saw wasn't that unusual. And we get about 3 days to look at it. And some of us are slower readers than others. I like to read it and think about it. And that's just a short amount of time to digest a great deal of information and an awful lot of critical information. So that's the concern I have. I try to digest it, but it's not really enough time for me.
Yeah. And let me just respond to that, Ed. One solution to that is pretty simple. So, for example, I'm going to you have received the report. If here were the Reader's Digest version, here were the top 5 things in that report, what questions or concerns do you have? Same thing with the investment report that you received from Linda. So I do, I'm not taking sides here. I do agree that that's a lot of information in a short amount of time. And board members might actually read more of it and focus on one subject at a time. Part of what we're finding with these 2 8-week terms is that students who are not taking 5 classes, but simply taking 2 one term and 3 another, are focusing on those classes in ways that they did not when they were taking 5. So the analogy there for the board is, you're drinking out of a fire hose once a month, and there may be ways you can work with administration and sort of do these one at a time and give a certain amount of time to look at them and then move to the next one. Another thing sometimes that works well is to do a 5-bullet executive summary for people that want to read that and don't want to read a full report. So again, keep going, Carol. These are valuable discussions.
Just want to make sure that we gave opportunity for feedback. Libby, you have your unmuted. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. In looking at this slide in particular, where it says each partner feels comfortable challenging one another's ideas, I think in this scenario, you're talking specifically about board and the staff. And I do wonder how comfortable Dr. Escamilla and staff are in challenging perhaps Regents' ideas. And I don't know if Dr. Escamilla, you're just so good at doing it in a very respectful and polite manner. But sometimes I feel like that in our board meetings that there are these attempts to just make sure that the Regents, I don't want to say are happy, and you're very good about trying to make sure we have all the information that we want, but I also want you and the staff to feel comfortable challenging the Regents' ideas and comments that we may make, because as Regent Scott mentioned, we all just come with our own perspective, and I feel like you, Dr. Escamilla, and the rest of your staff are the ones who have a broader picture, and just want to make sure that you feel comfortable challenging some things that we may say in the board meetings that may not be correct.
I think that objectively speaking, staff is very comfortable with defending their territory and or their data, from a very objective standpoint. I think when it gets into the blurring of the lines between policy and things that we're doing, I think that's where we begin to see reticence, and then right away I'll just say they start looking at me, and then I start getting eye contact, and that's when I interject into the conversations and so forth to at least draw a line of demarcation, say, okay, look, we don't have the information beyond this, or we're not going to satisfy your question today, those kinds of things. So in one sense, yes, they know their areas very, very well, and I don't think any are reticent to any degree of defending their presentations. I think it's just that gray area where they start looking to defer to me, and I have no problems. I mean, I typically don't. I've sat down with every one of the regents multiple times and resolved some very, very difficult situations. I have absolutely no problem doing that. I do think that there's a balance that takes place at the board meetings because of time constraints, and the fact that we do draw things out, and I know we tend to do over in terms of offering information. That makes things difficult. I don't want to do under, and let me just, I think this is where it comes from. I thought about it earlier. I found my thought. This community is very inquisitive, okay? This is a very, very dubious and inquisitive community. And this is my hometown. I get it. I've known it for a long time. It's a very different culture. And I came from Tyler Junior College, where if you went 45 minutes in a board meeting, gosh, that was a long day. And gosh, I was ready for lunch. 45 minutes, Mr. Bennett. I'm seeing the faces. 45 minutes. Okay, one time we went an hour and a half. I thought we were all going to die. But
and parenthetically, when I did one of their retreats, yes, they limited it to 2 hours.
Okay, so and there's less than that, and there's less than that out there. Okay, so I'm just saying, but I do like telling our story. I don't and I'm just going to say this, I don't like being on the air. It's not prescribed by law, but it's what we do here. It's what's always been done here. It is not the law. Okay. The law says you have to have 20,000 credit students or more to have it on the have it aired by law. It's just, and I know everybody's listening to me now, and I'm glad they're listening to me because I know that's the way we do things at the college. So I think it has a lot to do with just who we are. Okay. And then you add that, when you add to that the complexity of this board is designed to have 5 districts, 4 at large. And it's a brilliant design because it keeps us, is what you were talking about earlier, Madam Chair. You were talking about the design of this board. It is what is. It's the way, it's the very fabric of who we are. So you take the community's culture, okay, and you tie that to the framework of this board. And look, if I don't understand that, then nobody does. I have to understand. I don't only understand that, I've embraced it. So I came from board meetings that were very, 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 very short. In Chicago before that, they were a little long, not too long, an hour and a half maybe. But this is what is. Now, that being said, could we be more efficient? Do we need to be more efficient? Yes. And I think we're trying to be, but I think you see me, I think you'll see me overcompensating with information. I do like to tell stories, as I'm telling right now. Mm-hmm. That's where I come from. But I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable. I think there's a lot that can be done individually as well, and that's what I like to do.
And Libby, I would say, I always told the employees that worked with me, my definition of loyalty is you tell me what I need to know, not what you think I want to hear. And so that same definition of loyalty exists between the board and administration and the board, regents with each other. Is that that definition of loyalty is speak the truth, say what needs to be said, and you may be wrong, but at least have that ability. And so as we work even through this retreat and on into tomorrow, part of what we're going to work on too is where board CEO relationship has a little exercise we're going to do of what the board expects from the president, what the president needs from the board. So, but I appreciate that question because both sides need to feel comfortable as they're part of that tension.
And thank you, Dr. Escamilla, for your comments. The only thing I would add is I think that because our meetings do seem to run long, or at least that's my perception of them, I think in some ways that tamps down even the regents, and I'm not trying to speak for everybody else, but it certainly tamps down me perhaps having a more robust discussion about some of the items or challenging something. I mean, challenge is a strong word, but even, you know, talking through things a little bit more if I have a different thought, in part because I am aware of how long the agenda is and everything that we need to cover. And I wonder if we could make that a little bit more efficient. It might allow for some more robust discussion among the regents on some of the issues facing us.
Understood. I've got as you're talking, I've got we use those frameworks for other meetings where we have lean agendas with lots of room for the discussion part. So understood.
And let me just say one thing before we break for lunch and make sure nobody else has a comment that they want to make, as Carol was asking. But goals are fine. Objectives are measurable, but you got to have strategies. Failed plan to fail. So with each of these tomorrow, when we really start to dive into the board's plan for the next year, I'm going to insist that the board identify strategies to accomplish those goals and objectives. It's not enough to say we would like to find more efficient ways to run our meeting. Let's go ahead and work with Mark on that and say, here are some strategies. Or we as a board need some strategic deep dive time, you know, bringing in people from the community and experts and not just internal staff. And let's let's, after lunch, let's spend some time talking about what some of those strategic issues are.
The other thing too, the last 6-7 years, or 7.5 years, have been just a sea of change towards, as it relates to the college. I mean, what we've been doing with 2 major capital improvement bond projects and so forth requires an immense amount of conversation. There's so much detail to that. And so it's, I feel like the first 10 years of this, the majority of the 11 years, almost 12 years now that I've been here, has been monumental change, and I've said this over and over, in that our current strategic plan right here is the most student-focused plan that I've been a part of the 3 that I've been a part of writing since I got here in 2008. And so I think we've been so focused on these monumental decisions and so forth, and there's still pieces of those coming. It's just taken a lot of effort. I mean, you and I've talked, you've seen what we've been doing for 12 years back when we were at TAC together. Bill, I mean, you've seen, the things just developing. And so I want to say it's been a generation of change that's occurred in this past 11 years. And so that's another thing too, that it's just required, because there's so much in the way of public trust that needs to be maintained and guarded along the way.
Sure. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break here. And if you don't want to take a break and you want to get lunch, I think they've got food ready. So it would be nice if we could socialize a little more, but we're going to make the best use of that time and let Christina set up and get ready for her presentation.
So we'll come back at about 12:10.
Yes.
Regents, thank you for giving me this time this afternoon to talk about data, and in particular, student success data. I think this is a really good time to discuss this topic, because the last time we talked about the strategic plan was back in December. We spent a lot of time this past year developing the plan, refining the plan, and then during the fall 2019 semester, a committee of us worked hard to develop strategies, KPIs, but you've only heard of it since December. So now is a great time to touch on this again, to show you what we've been doing, and then also to talk about what's to come.
May I just add one quick commercial about this topic?
Of course.
Regents, this topic came along when I was asked to contribute to the agenda. And I think one of our greatest opportunities is understanding, for the Board of Regents to understand the genesis of the data. In other words, where does it really, how does it really evolve? Where does it come from? What are the timing issues of it, and so forth? And when both Chairwoman Scott and Dr. Holda asked me what I thought, I said, gosh, this is a really good opportunity for us to go back, because we're going to have another update over the summer for strategic planning outcomes and so forth. And then we got the big, first report coming in the fall. And I just would like to share with you what I thought of. Okay, it is to have an analogy or a metaphor out there. It's like making wine, and this is a new vintage. This is a new plan, and so the data, the grapes, will be matured and be best with a little bit of time behind them. More time, the better. In this case, we believe we have good grapes. So if you look at it from that standpoint, the best data is yet to come. And I know that's not, a lot of times the questions that you all have are, well, what about today? What about based on what we had from the last strategic plan? Or what about just existing data? How do you compare against that? And we can answer those too. I mean, we can do that. But if we're going to talk about the new strategies that we took so much time to develop as a board, and all of these new structures that we have in our plan for the future, we got to let the grapes mature a little bit. Okay, we all will enjoy a fine glass of wine one day, one way or the other. At the end of this, we hope no sour wine, no sour grapes. But I just want y'all to know that this was my input, and this is at my request. And I thank you, Dr. Christina, for continuing to lead the charge on this particular effort at the college. Thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And as you stated, we have to look at our data all the time. Our data is important all the time, but it's important to keep in mind that what we're doing with our strategic plan, these strategies, will take a little time to take effect and be reflected in that data. So that's part of what we'll be talking about today. We spent a lot of time developing our new strategic plan, Aspire, Engage, Achieve. And as you know, at Del Mar College, we have a 5-year strategic planning cycle. Our goals, our KPIs, our objectives, those are static. We're going to keep them for the 5 years. But we also need to be flexible. Things change. We know that more than ever right now. Things change unexpectedly. So we had always intended to have a strategic plan and also an operational plan. Our strategic plan helps guide us for the next 5 years, but the operational plan really starts to get into the nitty-gritty. So if you're here in person, Regents, you do have a paper copy of our operational plan. You first received a copy of this back in December. And for the Regents who are at home, you received an electronic copy this morning. So within this particular plan, the big addition that you see within the operational strategic plan are the strategies, which are our tangible actions that will take place. And also, in regards to the KPIs, you'll see our targets and our thresholds. Now, we're going to talk more about that today. But again, this document is meant to be flexible. We use our strategic plan as our guiding light, what we're striving for, but we need to adapt and adjust. Just a quick reminder, it took us about a year or so to develop this new plan, this new strategic plan. It was adopted in September 2019. And then over the course of the fall semester, the Strategic Planning Committee developed the operational plan. And at this point in time, the plan is to assess annually. That means that once a year, you're going to get a very detailed report on how we're doing, not just on our KPIs, but our activities. As always, you can ask questions anytime that you want on progress, how things are going. But when it comes to data, normally that's collected yearly. So let's talk about KPI thresholds and targets. This language is new for Del Mar College. We've always collected great data in our statistical profile. We've always looked at data. But what's new about this strategic plan is that we are seeking to identify what we're striving for. Where do we want to be in 5 years? So when you look at the operational plan, you'll see a threshold. And you can think of that as a baseline. We use the term threshold because that's what our accreditor uses, SAC-COC. That's a language that they use, so we've adopted that language. But that's our baseline. That's where we're starting. It may not necessarily be the exact data point from 2018 when we first started. It may be an average, but this is where we want to stay. We want our data to improve always, and our threshold is our baseline. The other aspect to this is the aspirational piece, our targets. So we always seek to improve, and we want to put it out there for the college. We want to look and see, are we meeting the target that we want to meet? So I heard Dr. Holda talk a little bit about this earlier, our aspirational targets. In a lot of ways, if you want to think of it this way, we're shooting for the stars. Where do we want to go? What is a reasonable measure of progress? But a lot of the strategies that we're putting in place now are new. we're not sure what that impact will be and when. So over time, as we review this within our committee, as regents, we may want to adjust these. That's totally okay. But I want to make sure we have the opportunity to talk a little bit about what the difference between those are. The way those thresholds and targets were set, again, within a committee, we looked at on average about 5 years worth of data for these particular metrics. If there were fluctuations within the last 5 years, we took an average, but we looked at where we or could we improve in 5 years? Also considering that this data takes time to develop. So 5 years from now, where can we be? How do we compare now also with our peers, and how much can we improve within that time period? So it was actually quite a lengthy process to get to those targets and to those thresholds, and a lot of good feedback was incorporated in that process. All right, again, what you'll see within the operational plan that's new, that's not within your the strategic plan that you're used to seeing, are the institutional strategies. These are our action items. What are we going to do to meet those goals and targets? So again, these need to be flexible. There were certain things that we had planned to get started this year that we're going to have to postpone a little bit because of COVID-19. There are other things that we need to do that we need to accelerate. For instance, we always knew that we wanted to improve and strengthen our distance learning. And now that's our bread and butter. We need to make sure that our faculty have the support they need to accelerate. So some things are moving based on current conditions and environment. So you'll see within your operational plan, those institutional strategies. All right, so let's talk a little bit about data. And I gotta tell you, I love data. It tells you a lot, tells you where you've been, where you're going. There's a lot of value to data. But you also have to think about the fact that sometimes a certain data item doesn't tell you the full picture. Data provides a snapshot of where we are. It takes time to collect and certify. And a lot of the key performance indicators that we have within our strategic plan are actually produced by the coordinating board. We wanted to make sure to align with the state's 60 by 30 plan. And so when it comes to collecting our internal data, submitting it to the state, and the state conducting their analysis, that does take time. So for instance, for example, this last academic year that just finished, 2018-2019, that data was analyzed, published, and put out there for public consumption in April 2020. So there is a delay. I would love to be able to say, oh yes, we're doing this strategy. We know exactly what's going to happen. We know the impact, but it does take some time. Another thing to consider is that the parameters of the data indicator that you're looking at does make a difference. There is no one indicator that's going to tell you the full story of a particular situation. You have to know what you're looking at. You have to think critically and look and see, is this telling me what I think it's telling me? And this is why I'm glad that we have this opportunity to talk. And you ask questions and we discuss, because though data is very valuable, you also have to know what it's showing you and what the limitations may be. So for example, goal 1 of our strategic plan is completion. And we've selected multiple ways to measure completion because no one particular measure tells the whole story. We've discussed this quite a bit within our retreats. So we do want to know the number of students completing certificates and degrees, but we also want to know the time it takes them to complete those certificates and degrees. What about the rates? Graduation rates are important, but of course, the way we calculate graduation rates has its limitations. We look at full-time students. We look at first-time in college students. You really need to look at multiple measures to understand the full situation. So that's why, as you're looking at your operational plan and you see like, my goodness, this is a lot of data. It's for a reason. We need to look at all of it to see the full picture. Okay. And of course, trends are very important. I talked about snapshots, where we are at a point in time. We want to look and see where we're trending. We want to improve over time. Of course, there's anomalies. There's activities and things that happen out of our control, like COVID-19, but we look generally at trends. And we also want to look and see how we compare to our peers. There's no other institution out there in Texas or anywhere else that's just like Del Mar College. So sometimes it's hard to get that peer comparison and say, well, are we really in that same situation? That has limitations also, but it's beneficial. It's good to see what are our peer colleges doing, the other large colleges, are the state doing? It can provide us with another piece of that data puzzle. Okay, so I talked a little bit about how data takes time and understanding that we're starting a lot of great new strategies that we're really excited about, but I want to illustrate this with an example. We talk about graduation rates very frequently. So for instance, our FTIC, which is first time in college, full-time graduation rates, the most recent data that we have is from academic year 2019. And for this year, our graduation rate is 17.8%. Okay, so this is a very important indicator that's a part of our strategic plan. But if you think about it, these particular students, our most recent data actually measures the experience of students who started in fall 2015. There is that delay. So if you apply that to our strategic plan, we just adopted this plan in September 2019. That's academic year 2020, just adopted it this last fall. So to see what happened to these students, these FTIC full-time students who started under our new strategic plan for this particular indicator, we would really just begin to see the impact in the academic year 2023 data. So every year's data is important. We're going to look at it. We're going to analyze. We're going to look at trends. But I wanted to illustrate this and just keep it in mind that the model of educational research can be a little different from what you see with business research. When we're dealing with people, when we're dealing with timeframes and cohorts, sometimes this data takes time to be reflected in our institutional data.
If we see it every year, then why is it not available until 2023?
Well, you definitely can see it every year, but what I'm trying to illustrate here is that if you want to see the impact of our new strategic plan, yes. So this is something that will be reported every year, but we can't anticipate that any of the new strategies will be demonstrated within our data by that time. Sure.
So there are a lot of problems with data, quite frankly. One of them is this is lagging data, and I know Christina's going to talk about that some, but these kids started in 2016. Well, to get a 3-year cohort that shows your 2019 graduation rate, that's why you have to wait to see it. Think of it this way. How many points does it take to put something on a graph? It takes 2 coordinates. You got an X and a Y. In a cube, you got 3 to find a spot. So think of it that way. To really get your handle on what's going on here, you need multiple measures of assessment. So you're not only going to be looking at where did we go from last year to this year, but how do we compare with our peer institutions in percentages? Where are we going long term? FTIC full-time is a lousy measure. 2/3 of your students are part-time. It means you're only measuring 1/3 of your students. So a couple of years ago, Bill Hammond took out billboards that he put in Austin and Dallas and different places and said, Austin Community College only has a 7% graduation rate, 3-year graduation rate. Is that a good use of taxpayer dollars? The problem was that slice was just one little group of students that represented less than 1/4 of their student population. NEDS does not consider dual credit in any of their data. They wait till they get here to Del Mar. So you might have kids with 30 hours, who arrive here and they're not part of that number. So I think the message is there are these measures and you use multiple measures to assess the health. Ed's an accountant. He knows that if he's going to assess the health of a business, you're looking at all sorts of stuff, not just revenue and expenditures. You're looking at liabilities. You're looking at, yes, everything, you know. So it's the same thing here. And I think the point that is there is that the institution is, and I think Christine will show you, they are able to show you right now where their baseline is, what their aspirational target is, and but that's just for one measure. But that really doesn't tell you a story. And it's not until you see all the pictures. Earlier, Carol was talking about how board members come through different doors of this building. And people would describe this building differently depending on which door they came in. It's the same thing of the three blind men in India holding an elephant. One had a tail, one had a trunk, one had a leg. You know, they're describing it very differently. Data does that same thing. Is what you're going to find is that no single one data measure gives you what you need. It's only when you start to assemble this whole matrix of data that you really can zero in on and say, okay, now we really know how we're doing. So I just wanted to sort of answer that a little more fully, Gabe. Sorry.
It's okay. No, that was really good. Thank you. So I've been talking to Dr. Holda. We've been talking about where we are, what we've worked on, what we've discussed with the Board of Regents, and what we're going to do moving forward. So I wanted to share with you what the plans are, what you will be seeing, and I want to make sure it's what you want to see, because these are things that we're doing for the first time. We are adjusting based off of what we're learning. And the plan right now is, as Dr. Escamilla mentioned, there's a presentation coming up in the summer, potentially another one in the fall. But what we'd like to share with you is, where are we right now as an institution on these KPIs? Where are we? How do we compare to our peers? And where do we want to be? That tells the story of our strategic plan. That tells the story of our student success activities. And that's demonstrated in your operational plan. You can start to see some of these things already. So within your strategic plans, where we are now, our KPI thresholds capture that, but we also have new data since we developed this strategic plan. This took a year to develop. We developed these thresholds and targets in the fall. Since then, there is new data. So this is what we'll be providing to you so you can see what's most recent. We also want to show you how our peers are doing on these indicators. And then finally, our targets. How close are we? For the most part, our targets are set for the end of the strategic plan within 5 years, but there's a few in there that have some interim measures or even longer term measures. So I'd like to share an example with you of where we are, how do we compare, and where we want to be. So using that same measure of FTIC full-time 3-year graduation rates, within your operational plan, you'll see that for this KPI, the threshold is 15%. That's based off of an average baseline. Our most recent data is also included in the slide in front of you. Our most recent 2019 data is 17.8%. So we have already made an increase over our threshold. In comparison to our large college peers here in Texas, they have an average 19.5%. 3-year graduation rate. And our aspirational target for 2024 is 20%. So we're making great progress towards that target. And this is the beginning of the plan. We may want to change that target if we find that that's something that we exceed very early on. But this is the kind of data and the picture that we want to show you over time and regularly.
So using this example and what you just talked about on the previous slide on how our current number is 17.8. The original threshold from, I guess, December was 15%. Correct. But we really won't see the impact of these strategies for 3 more years. So the fact that we have a 17.8% graduation rate amongst the FTIC 3-year, that group is really about things that we've been doing at the end of our old strategic plan, your nudge campaigns, other kinds of things.
Yes, you have that exactly right.
Okay.
As Dr. Escamilla says, this strategic plan is very student success focused, but it didn't start there. We've been working in that direction for quite a while. So you're absolutely right, Regent Scott. This captures the activity of the prior strategic plan.
And we do fall into the large college category, do we?
Yes, ma'am.
So what's above this? That's it? Extra large?
There is extra
Oh, really?
large. There is extra large. We got the Dallases, the Alamo colleges, the metropolitan areas.
I think
Usually
it's
have
Tarrant, Dallas, Austin, Alamo,
South Texas College,
South Texas, Houston, Lone Star, and El Paso. Yeah, so there's quite a few in that very large category.
On how you slice it, and I think there's some reconsideration of the large group as well, because there's some other colleges within that large group that were, I think at one point Central Texas was extremely large, and just they had a dramatic decrease. So I don't know what's going to happen there, but yeah, there's basically the 5 categories. No, they just use it for a general category. I mean, just for
Those changes are not made very often, Elva. They're pretty stable. So it's Amarillo, Central Texas, Del Mar, Laredo, Tyler Junior College, Texas Southmost, Blinn. Yeah, Blinn's in there. And there's one more that I'm missing.
And there's a range of enrollments, and it doesn't change very often.
I think Blinn with Bill is the one that needs to be reconsidered. I mean, it's there. It's got this huge enrollment. It's categorized as, yeah.
So this is what we want to show you on a regular basis. When it comes to reporting on this strategic plan, we'll also want to share our strategies with you and how those are going. But when it comes to data, this is the picture that we want to show over time. So you can see trends, how we compare, how we're changing. And as I mentioned, our operational plan should be dynamic. If we need to change some of these things over time because we're finding, hey, this one strategy is working great, let's change it, let's do it. If we're finding, we can't get to this strategy because we had to divert some of our efforts for COVID-19, let's change it.
Christina,
That's totally possible.
Let me just add, there are other anomalies that we find now that we are breaking out. We put down the telescope and we've got the microscope when we're looking at the college now. Think of it that way. That's what I was trying to describe earlier. I think those first 10 years here for me were just using the telescope and reaching out. And of course, don't get me wrong, I'll never put that down. But what this plan does, it enables us to use the microscope and to break things down and disaggregate various data sets. As an example, what we're finding right now, when we look at some of our numbers on the state, what's it called, the almanac, or
the almanac.
Yeah, the state almanac. Numbers of hours completed. Our numbers are very high and on there comparatively and so forth of completed. But what we're trying to tease out and what we're thinking we're finding out is in those data sets, we have lots of students in there with multiple degrees in there, both 2-year and 4-year degrees. Did you find out any more?
I'm still pending
Okay.
additional info.
Okay. So we're teasing out some theories to say some of those students in there have other associate degrees, and guess what counts towards their hours here? Some of those hours are being counted towards the total number of hours that they have. And so we're teasing those kinds of things out, and we're getting the microscope out, and we're confirming those types of ideas. I don't want to say theories just yet, but because we do see evidence that there are included in there. And so we're trying to tease out things like that. So think of it as this plan right here is really enabling us to break out the microscope, to get into the fine detail within the data sets that we have out there and the strategies that are there for them. So I think that's what I was trying to say earlier today. Sorry for that interruption.
No, that's great. And the questions that you have, what you see in the data, what you observe, what you question, it helps us to think about, are we looking at our data as fully as we can. So this is new for the college to look at it this way and to discuss it this way. So as we go through this process this year, the next year, please let us know. Let us know what's going on. And I was really pleased when I heard from Dr. Holda that this was something that was coming out of the discussions, that you want to know how we're doing. You want to know how we can get better, how we compare. That is the perfect next best step after the completion of our strategic plan. So even though the document was approved, that doesn't mean we're not going to continue these conversations, that we're not going to make these changes. So please keep your questions going. If we give you data that you think, well, you know, Dr. Wilson, maybe we can look at it a little different way, or what about this? We're refining it and getting stronger as we go. So I do appreciate the conversation that was shared with me from Dr. Holda, and I'm looking forward to future conversations to come.
Dr. Wilson, just to make a short comment here. I'm very pleased that the entire board got involved. And this is the first time, because strategic plans in the past, it was just maybe one or two members. But this year or last year, you got the entire board involved in strategic planning. And I think that's the best thing that happened to the board. We're involved in the vision, mission, statement, our goals, and that was excellent.
Thank you, Regent Estrada. That was such a dynamic year. If you think about it, we had so much, there's always so much for the board to do, but the fact that we set time to have day-long retreats, half-day retreats, and everyone was engaged, it really was a very fulfilling process. Thank you.
I have some questions about kind of where we are today versus December, and then another set of questions about kind of our annual reporting, which I guess is technically your next slide. But I noticed that you gave us the same document that you gave us in December, yes. Correct? Mm-hmm. And so there were dual credit targets under development. There were a couple of notes in here about things that were under development. Mm-hmm. So what is the process, or when do you anticipate having completed your first year operational plan?
Sure. The few KPIs that were pending, I'll tell you that when it comes to dual credit data, that one is it's quite complex. So what we're doing at this point is we're working with the registrar's office, the dual credit office, and the IR office to make sure that we are measuring that correctly. So that work will start to happen over the summer. But what's interesting about dual credit data is that we report enrollment for dual credit. We do. We're required to do that. But the state doesn't require that we report success or student achievement. So these metrics that we're creating, we really are creating them and figuring out the best way to do that. So that's why it is pending. It's going to take a little bit more time. I'm anticipating those being done by early fall.
And then regarding this timeline, I think we had talked at one point during the adoption period last summer about the board's and the president's annual evaluation and having this try to sync up in some way, shape, or form. So you have reporting on institutional strategies annually by February 1st, which would be great because that's when the board traditionally the February-March timeframe starts its self-evaluation, which then moves into the president's evaluation. So that I'm great with. What I'm curious about is evaluation on KPI progress and updates to the board. Is there a reason other than it's the annual of the adoption of the plan, but is that a date that we can push back into a May-June timeframe? Because to me, the fresh data that the president prepares for us around his state of the college and annual objectives, that ought to be all part of that discussion.
That would be ideal. It would give us more time. The reason why we set that was more of an issue of adhering to a calendar, an annual planning calendar, because that's the way it fell in the development of the plan. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily the development of the data. So absolutely, and I would have an opportunity to tie them more directly and so forth, what you and I have been talking about for several years now. Those grapes won't be fully developed by then, but all things considered, there'll be 6 months more data and time behind us for that discussion. Absolutely.
So I didn't know if it was a result of when the data is available, if the data is typically available in April or May, and you all spend the summer massaging it, but But again, I think there might be elements of this, maybe not all elements of the strategic plan are those data points would be available at the same time. But I think there needs to be not just annual updates, but every 6-month updates on the strategic plan, because there's so much in here. So it's not a matter of gotcha or double checking. It is a matter of reporting what's working and what's not, so that we're all in this together. If we all have that information, and the public has that information, and the college has that information, it is our plan. If we only discuss it once a year, then it becomes this thing that is not alive in our hearts and minds all the time. And that's what I'm looking for, is that opportunity for us to have those robust discussions on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Half of it was, a big part of it was just, again, developing a plan. That took 2 years to really get kicked off, if you think about it. It took every bit of 24 months to get even where we are now. More than that. But now that the data will be generating, you'll get, it's kind of like the annual report. You'll get a base year kind of report for the enrollment, and then you'll get an off base year. So you'll get a heavier report than a lighter report because of the nature of the timing of everything. So some data will be less developed, but over time, it'll just get stronger and stronger in terms of indicators.
And what I would suggest is, if the board chose to request a student success update at every meeting, then there are two formats here. One is, as data becomes available or initiative strategy information becomes available, share that with the board on an ongoing basis rather than wait till the end. But for that data for which you do need to wait some time, then certainly incorporate that into an annual report. But here's what's so interesting about all this is that when you look at these various strategies, the 8-week courses, and lowering time to degree. So what you may see is a decline in your 4-year graduation rate, and you may see a bump in your 3-year graduation rate. And that's the job, because you're reducing number of hours to degree. So that's the job of IR and institutional effectiveness administration, is to stay on touch of that and to try to figure out the reasons that things have moved. The problem that you're going to find is that this is not a control experiment where you're manipulating one variable. You're putting in a whole series of strategies over time. And so it's like, if which I need to do, go on a diet, exercise more, do this, and I see success, which one was it? Well, it may have been the result was the combination of everything together. So it may be difficult to know exactly how much came from change in terms, the strategies used to lower degrees to completion, beefing up the counseling services that you've done. I mean, it may be difficult to be able to attribute it to one item, but at least the combination, the cocktail that you're mixing is working. So, but there are times where certain data become available right away. And whether those are enrollment data, completion of the first 8, after 8 weeks, they'll have some completion data to give you mid-semester that shows how that compared to the previous long term of 2019 fall.
Yeah. And so, Mayor, I see you. I'll get to you in just a second. I want to finish up this thought, and then I'll get to you. So I look at it as a pipeline, and there's any number of things that are going to affect movement into that pipeline and the movement through that pipeline, whether the product in the pipeline gets clogged or not. There's all kinds of issues, whether there's leaks and stuff people fall. So I know there's multiple variables on how students move through that pipeline. Get that. I think what I'm going to ask for here is for this slide to be a little bit more robust, because I see an example where our student completion and our academic preparedness and student learning data might come at a different time. Our recruitment and persistence data might come at a different time. Our learning environments and workforce development community partnerships might be able to be reported at a different time, and certainly the financial effectiveness would be reported at a different time. So I almost see quarterly reports of different pieces, so that each piece is reported on annually, but there's a quarterly look at a different part of our strategic plan, as opposed to one report in the fall that will be partial and complete. This data is 6 months old, but that's the most recent data we have, but this data is brand new.
And it would be a lot.
And it would be a lot of
tremendous
information
amount.
for us to absorb at one time. So I think if we broke this timeline down on reporting into that kind of environment would make a lot more sense. And y'all figure out what makes sense. And then let's put that on our board calendar as quarterly reports as opposed to just one big annual report. Yeah, you like that. Dr. Sherwood?
Yeah, I just want to echo sort of what you're saying. I was going to suggest something along the same lines, and also the thing with regard to certified data. We understand that can take a long time for the coordinating board to certify, but and that's often because other institutions haven't reported. But we may have our own data and feel pretty good about it, so I don't see any reason to hold up, completely, absolutely for the final number, yes, but we can see it before it's absolutely certified, is my thought.
One of the things that we talked about again and again last year during our retreats is the fact that we don't want our strategic plan to be a shelf document. We don't want it to be something that collects dust, that, hey, you approved it, and we're going to look at it every now and again. And what you're telling me, I think that this is great. I think it makes a lot of sense, and it integrates the actions that you're doing with the plan on a more regular basis. So I appreciate those suggestions, and I'll look at a good schedule for that. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Another item that we've talked about, and Regent Scott has talked about this repeatedly over the years, and that is there's state data and then there's local data, and we are working, again, breaking out the microscope to tease out our local data that means something to us, that mean a lot to us, and we're starting to pull out local data sets that are really about our local workforce, because as similar as we are to Amarillo College, we're vastly different in the way of the curriculum and other things, and the economies and everything else. And so we are working to provide a whole other layer of localized data. We've been working on that. I saw a report just recently with a request that I put out there as an example that said that March 19 to March 20, the college produced almost 2,300 short-term certificates. Short-term certificates, CNA, truck driving, all these other short-term programs, 2,300, one calendar year. And so that was an example of a very powerful piece that we're using at the association at the state level for an initiative over there, that 300 by 300 project that I'm working on. And so I'm just letting you know there's data out there that the state will collect in pieces, but will not project as part of 60 by 30 or anything like that, or any part of its bigger, broader views on higher ed accomplishments. So stay tuned. We have been building those data sets as well. And I appreciate the chair's approach on that, saying, well, that's nice, we've got these numbers, but how do we break it down and what does it actually mean to us? And we need to tell that story. We're advancing on that.
Our state data is so important. There's a lot of it in our strategic plan, but I completely agree, the state versus local. And embedding this within the plan and figuring out how it can work for us. We have this indicator and this other indicator. What kind of story does it tell us? And we're building it, we're presenting it, and we're seeking to understand the story of our students and how we can best help them. So I completely agree with where this discussion is headed.
Other comments? Questions?
Let me just say that the part of what happened was when I started the phone calls to you all, I heard from a number of you that you felt very good about developing the KPIs, but I did hear a theme from a number of you that you did not know the current percentages or the target percentages. And I realized that a lot of things were in play. It was a December meeting. Some people were missing. It was a short presentation. You've had disruption this year. You've got new terminology. But what I've recommended is that Christina go back through each of those KPIs right now and on fairly short notice, if it's okay with Mark, share with you all, here's where we are currently, here's where our peers are, here's our target. And put a number on each one of those KPI targets that can be measured that way. Because I do see you've gotten a fair amount of reports that do show internal progress. I think the other thing that Mark can help develop for you is that what he was talking about is that unique context. So there's two sides to this. One side is some colleges suffer from terminal uniqueness. Nobody can understand why we have to do it the way we do it because we're just so unique. The flip side of that is, though, there is uniqueness. So in the days that Mark Escamilla was provost at Tyler Junior College, 85% of their student population was enrolled in university parallel courses. 50% of KC, Kilgore College students were enrolled in university parallel courses. So when you talk about transfer rate, we had a hugely different transfer rate because half our population never intended to transfer in the first place. So that's where drilling down and identifying those unique characteristics that are needed to really understand variations in data, it's a responsibility of administration to provide that context for you along the lines of what you were asking, Carol.
You just said my favorite word, context.
If Dr. Escamilla's heard it once, he's heard it 1,000 times. Provide the context for information.
All right. Anything else on this, Dr. Escamilla? Any other comments from Regents?
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
And I would think that something in this arena is going to appear in your plan for next year for you as a board, because I heard so much interest in staying really in touch with that and developing some board strategies for moving forward and really getting the information that you're looking for. Okay, so I'm back to the presentation, and let's see, do we need to pull something up to make it appear?
Yes, shoot, she's going to pull it up for you.
Good. Okay, so I want to spend just a minute or two, maybe 5 minutes at the most, talking about, we're talking about maybe doing this review of written documents and where we are. And so I want to talk about another document that you might want to consider formulating. You don't have to, but I'm going to talk about it. And that is maybe think about a job description for the board chair. What I have heard from you as board members is, and this is not in any way a disparagement of any individual, but I have heard that the board meetings and the board feels a little different, and it's in the right direction since Carol has assumed the chairmanship. That it's just a slightly different feeling that board members had from previous board chair. So that's a compliment, Carol. It's not meant to be a criticism of your predecessor. It's a compliment. And so, yes, sir. Oh, okay. Yeah. So, but what, much like you, when a church changes a pastor, if the church has its own culture and wants to preserve what it is, it's tough sometimes because that pastor will bring a whole new culture to the parish. So, so when parishes are strong and the people are the church, then it doesn't happen as much. So sometimes in this situation, having a few guidelines with the chair position, and there's not a problem here now. I'm trying to look to the future where when someday Carol says I'm done being chair, or the board selects officers and selects somebody else. So for a chair, a written job description, hopefully an orientation to the incoming person from the outgoing chair and the college president, You know, you do evaluations of the board does a self-evaluation. You do evaluation of the president. Some boards will actually do an evaluation of the board chair, and it can be sort of a midterm correction or some things you'd like to do differently. I'll give an example. So one regent that I talked to said, you know, what might help meeting management would be from time to time to do part of what Carol's doing today, calling on people and saying, I haven't heard from you, or what do you think about this? And people may be keeping quiet, as Libby said, for the length of the meeting or for other reasons. So in that situation, that could be feedback that came through. Sometimes there's expectations of an incoming board chair that they do sweeping changes, or for others that nothing change. And so, and then it develops a lack of leadership continuity. So this is not my original material, but unless the position, duties, responsibilities of the board chair are clearly defined, the effectiveness of the board it doesn't necessarily have to fluctuate as a function of changing board chairs. Personality, not principle or policy, dictates board functioning and culture. And there are probably, through ACCT and others, probably plenty of examples of that. This is not a big issue for me. I just, as long as you were talking about revising documents, doing a review, sort of looking at everything, you could, if you wanted to, throw that in the hopper. I really want to spend the rest of the time, and well, ultimately, the board has the ultimate authority. The chair is accountable to the board. President reports to the board, not to the board chair. The board chair, though, does have an additional responsibility of interacting with the CEO in a lot of cases where it's just not practical to interact with all board members at the same time. And so I'm just going to leave that at that. I don't know that we need extensive discussion on that unless somebody has some thoughts. But if the board decides that, yeah, let's go ahead and do that, as long as we're cleaning up all our other documents and doing a major review, we can do it. Where I really want to focus the next 45 minutes on is examples of the kinds of questions boards should be asking and the things that they could and should be focusing on. So I'm going to really need some involvement here from the board. I've heard from a number of you that you would like the board to really dive into some of the upcoming strategic decision issues that are going to be facing you. But I would like to hear from some of you, what are some of those, what are examples of issues that are going to be facing this community or this college that are going to need some deep strategic analysis and discussion and understanding by the regents?
Can you repeat that again?
So, sure. So I'll give you an example. I'll throw one or two out that I've heard from regents. So something like the formation of the Southside campus was a big strategic issue. If someone wants to consider phase 2 of that, is that a big strategic issue? I know someone wants to, because I've already heard this from them. So or another example would be, and this is a hot button issue statewide, Marco's going to know what I'm talking about. What are the names of them? Portland, and there was one other one, school district wanted to join the Del Mar service area, Robstown, and Portland wanted to.
The taxing district.
Yeah, so how is that a big strategic issue that's out there? What about other schools that are not in the Del Mar service area, but would like to be part of Del Mar and not be part of either Victoria or Coastal Bend?
It's kind of the general way to say is our service area and our taxing district, and what are the opportunities and challenges.
So what I'm really trying to do, Gabe, is give some examples without doing your work for you of of the type of, what are some of the big issues that you think need some extensive discussion and that are going to be strategic to posture the college. And at the end, I'm going to see what Mark says, because he has a perspective too. But just to posture the college in a proactive mode to get out in front of what's coming rather than reacting to it.
I think the what has happened as a result of COVID-19, and it's been talked about a little bit here, is our shift to online learning, which was was one of many teaching methodologies that can work, but we don't have the data to show the results of all of that yet. But what does that give? How does that present itself as an opportunity for us to expand distance learning as it relates to dual credit, as it relates to our service area, as it relates to the potential expansion of services in this region? And what are the resources and big budget and policy decisions around that? Dr. Escamilla and his staff have a lot of latitude to deploy resources to teach students of all kinds as they see fit. But for the board to understand what are the strategic challenges, opportunities, and resources that might be required that came out of that, to me, would be a big one to dive into.
Okay. Other issues going to be coming at the community, the college.
Yeah, the taxing district has been an issue, been around for a long time. Right now, we only service 5 independent school districts in the area, but we have students coming in here from 40, 45 miles away, and especially with all the new industry coming to Santa Patricia, I think that would be a fair area to consider bringing into our tax industry.
I remember, Gabe, when the legislature actually passed a local bill to allow the in-district residents and the out-of-district residents to vote together, and the combined vote would determine it, and Governor Perry vetoed it. And he said he had more objections to that bill than any bill that hit that legislative session.
Well, because of the language, it didn't specify a district, it just specified a coastal area.
I see.
To be able to bring in an outlying area without them voting on it.
Okay.
And that's where, when they found out about it.
Yeah.
Mary, you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to, this is just a thought rolling around in my head, but we've been always wonderful at reacting to the needs of industry and serving those needs educationally, particularly the energy industry and, petrochemical of all kind. And I'm kind of wondering, as we look at changes maybe that could be coming through the future in that, working to get ahead of that, is more alternative energy coming because of everything we're learning? How do we not only just react to what energy and industry needs are, but how do we even work with existing industries and maybe even industries we don't even have here yet to move us forward, not just as the college, but as the community, because we have been so dependent on energy and tourism and agriculture to some extent. But, do we have a role in expanding what our economic underpinnings are?
So I summarize that to say, anticipate workforce needs and our response to that for both existing industries and emerging industries of all kinds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good summary.
And for example, NOVA, Northern Virginia Community College, has about 80,000 students, big system, much like Dallas and Houston and Lone Star. And so it's like people are being laid off. People are out of work with the virus. Where can you not find enough workers? Amazon Web Services says we need, I don't know how many thousand cloud programmers. So Amazon Web Services is underwriting a cloud programming order of education in Virginia with Nova to try to get, I don't know how many cloud computing people up to speed immediately. And you probably, many of you have seen that video. I know it, a shift happens, but it talks about how many people are in China, how many in India, how many in the United States, the world dynamics, how many careers are going to be out there in 10 years that don't even exist today. It's very forward thinking, but that was a good comment, Mary. I think you're right on target with that.
One other comment is, look at Walmart. They've hired so many people lately just to deliver, not deliver, but do the shopping for other people.
Yeah.
You go to Walmart, you go to HEB, and you see just clerks just out there, filling baskets. So that's another good example.
Yeah.
But one of the issues that I think, and I don't know that we have an answer at this time, but I've gotten some calls, people, what's going to happen in August? Are we going to start school? I don't know. And I honestly don't know.
So
refer them to me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
We are starting school. I promise you, we're not stopping.
No, like classes.
They got to be face to face.
Yeah, we'll have versions of all that. We're formulating all that. Just have them referred to me.
I'll refer them to you.
So I'd like the board to take a deep dive into looking forward for our marketing and strategic enrollment. We're building a new campus, and so for the board to understand what staff is doing around their strategic enrollment plan and marketing for now what will be 3 robust campuses for the college. I think that's important for us to understand.
Okay. Other issues that you think are strategic, going to require strategic analysis and thinking and real board understanding and some extensive discussion?
This is Mary. It's already sort of underway, but I think the idea of whether or not we become a residential campus in any way is a huge topic.
That's a pretty good list right there. I mean, you probably wouldn't get through all of those in a year. You might.
We've advanced some of those, including residential. We actually had an agenda item on next month's, past month's board meeting, May or June, to talk about that. I think it was June, and we've shifted that because of our priorities, because of COVID-19, and so as to be efficient with that meeting and focus on what it needs to be. But we've begun talking about that, exploring partnerships and all those kinds of things. So,
Mark, you've heard the board's reaction to that question. From where you sit, what do you think are going to be the real strategic areas that are going to need extensive understanding and board support?
So as far as our local, I think, we have to kind of sort through the COVID-19 fog and kind of get beyond that. It's really hard to see through all that right now. But that being said, I think locally it's adhering to, I think I like a lot of what Dr. Sherwood talked about with watching the emerging programs and technologies and so forth, and understanding where the curriculum can go in the future. I think we've begun doing that in some ways. I think there's a lot more conversation around that to really fully understanding that wide net that is our curriculum and how we can adjust there. I'm always thinking 2, 4, and 6 years out, even 10, and then I've got that long 50-year outlook that I brought with me when I got here. People said I'm crazy. Some people still do, but when I start looking at the short term, I think of I think of the legislative session coming up and how we're positioned there, and how we are, how we are beginning to feel some love from the leadership up there. We're most grateful for that last legislative session when they did roll back our rollback, shrink our lessen our rollback rate. This time when they're talking so far, and I said so far, they're talking about carving us out of the 5% current biennium cut. When they're starting to do those kinds of things, I think strategically we cannot underestimate that. So all those things at the Capitol cannot be underestimated. I'm going to say that Chairwoman Scott's role out there, bolstering that and leading that trustees organization as an officer's helped. Certainly spending time now growing up, kind of growing up in the organization there as an officer myself, all of that helps. So I think that in a nutshell, things going on in Austin, but here locally, there's been a story that has been developing over the past 10 years, and that has been the amount of investment that's coming. What you saw differently from the last time you came here, Dr. Holder, is kind of what I experienced coming back after a long time, being gone for only 15 years. But the realization of how this town is going to be affected by the 50+ billion that we've been talking about, those investments are just being built out. Yeah. The downstream long-term effects of that is what we've been positioning for. Let me just add one other thing, if I may, and this is really important. But and it's why I'm going to say this. It's why I came home. It is why I came home, and why I chose to jump in 2008 when things were very different in this seat. Is the history of the educational attainment of this community. Okay, you've got to understand that. You've got to at least understand where I'm coming from. And I think many of y'all do. I think all of y'all do. But I'm just saying, I think I'm never going to forget that, because that's probably the first thing I think of every day. It's how the generations of people did not, for whatever reason, including some very bad reasons, did not access education for generations. Okay, that's the foundation that we have here, and we're trying to bolster that foundation. That historical context never leaves my mind with everything we do. And we've talked about it and talked about it. We only touch on it. We only touch on it. But I just want everybody to know that historical context, we can't forget. I appreciate there was something that Regent Rivas said today that I hadn't heard of or thought of, about something Governor Perry did in 2000 or 1998 or 97 or something like that. I'd forgotten about that. After 2000. Yeah, just right after 2000. Yeah. So I'm just saying the historical context of who we are as we're positioned here in South Texas. We're a lot like Australia. You got to mean to go there. That 7-hour drive probably told you about that. We're out in the middle. We're out here by ourselves in a lot of ways, with all due respect to the little towns. But it's important. It's important. And I talk about forefathers, and I talk about people in struggles and everything else. I talk about how Del Mar College led things through the civil rights movement long before some other critical legislation. The history of this college cannot be forgotten, is what I'm saying. And I live it. I wake up every day, and that's one of the first things I think of. So I just got to add that to that, because I think what kind of drapes all of these strategic things is that.
It's good. You were telling me that, what is it, the 3 counties here, if they were an independent country or if they were a state, I forget the data that you were telling me.
Yeah, so if just this county and the northern county, it's not in our, it's in our service area in San Patricio County. If we were our own economy by way of investment, we would be 15th as a state in the union in the way of investment. Just these two counties. And that was told to us by our Economic Development Corporation folks. We had the speaker that came in. I'm still reading his stuff, and I wasn't able to attend. But yes, that level of investment has a reverberating effect that has yet to even begin.
Yeah. So one thing I haven't heard anybody mention, and I'm just curious, either in my one-on-one phone calls with you and I don't remember seeing it in the evaluation. So where's the board on advocacy? And when I say advocacy, I mean it at multiple levels. You know, at one level with state elected officials, your legislators, that level, and then even on the local level with the county judge, the mayor, city council members, etc. Where is the board in terms of advocacy?
In a real general sense, from a state and federal level, we don't adopt our own legislative agenda. We partner with the state and national associations and support those agendas, and we participate in those association activities, whether it's the day in Austin, whether it's communication when they request it, and as individuals, we get involved at that level. We tend to not send. Everybody who wants to go at the state level can go. We tend to send only one or two people at the federal level, just because to the
expense and distance.
Yeah, expense and distance, and we all go to the annual Congress. We don't all go to the National Legislative Summit. But I think locally, because of the broad constituencies that we talked about earlier, the strength of the board, I think every one of us have personal relationships with mayors and city council and county judge and commissioners and state representatives and state senators. I think if there was and so we do it informally that way. The president makes official comments and correspondence from time to time. I, as chair, will do so, and we all make contributions at the levels that we can. But I think the personal relationships, which is a strength for a community the size that we are, that we have multiple personal relationships with elected officials and other bodies. So I think the reason that it doesn't come up is I don't think it's a problem for us. We need to talk to a state rep or a state senator or a city council or county official. We can do so pretty effectively. Libby is the current chairman of the United Chamber of Commerce board, and so we're effective at that level. We've LULAC, we've just got folks who are involved in a taxpayers association. We've got folks who are involved in all kinds of levels. So I think it's pretty productive from that standpoint. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, well, I didn't know, and I know that there have been some times where some key legislators, let me put it this way, some legislators who held some key positions, such as chair of calendars and others, were folks from your area and could be very influential, not only in promoting the Del Mar agenda, but also affecting community colleges statewide. So, and sometimes that particular situation I'm thinking of a couple times where we leaned on him, the leaning came from Del Mar trustees. It actually was the pressure point that made it work, where we got some stuff held up in calendars and passed through calendars. So
we've had great success. We've entertained Senator Cornyn down here on a regular basis. We've had Congressman McLeod here on a regular basis. Senator Hinojosa, Vice Chair of Finance on the Senate side, has come as a good friend. Representative Hunter, as you alluded to, Representative Herrera. So we've had really solid. J.M. Lozano when he was chair of higher ed. We've been very fortunate that we've had really strong relationships with all those individuals throughout the years. Yes, I thought I mentioned that. Yeah. So.
Okay, but I just wondered because I guess the fact that no one mentioned it, it was not seen as any kind of issue at all. That it just assumed that that's a relevant thing. Okay, so now I want to shift gears a little bit and use some real reflection time to improve. So I would like you to feel comfortable enough to identify some discussions or situations that you think may have been rabbit trails in board meetings as a way of identifying and moving toward areas that you should be focused on. So in my conversations with all of you, I think pretty much everybody said occasionally, it's not like it's all the time, but occasionally we'll get tied up in something and take quite a bit of time on it in a meeting. And I'm not sure, I'm quoting some regions, I'm not sure that some of that is where we should be spending our time. And it goes back to that really focusing on big things. So can you help me understand some examples? And it's not meant to be on a personal level at all. It's a question of what would be some examples of discussions where the board has gone, and in retrospect, perhaps that was more of a administrative management decision or could have been handled in a different format.
It may be me, and forgive me if it's just me, but I really think that if we could cut down on our investments report. I think we're getting too much information. There's a lot of repetition, and maybe I shouldn't even be saying
No,
this,
it's okay.
But that's the way I feel, that perhaps cutting down on some of that information, and probably Mr. Bennett here disagrees with me because he likes the investment.
I like it, but there's too much of it.
Oh, good. So you agree with me. Okay. One of these guys. Libby?
Well, piggybacking on that, I was just going to say too, I believe we had discussion earlier about potentially having an audit committee, and I agree that the investment report seems too long. And if indeed we had a more active audit committee, finance committee, whatever we end up calling it, I think that might help. That would give me some trust as a regent that those issues had been reviewed at some level.
And Libby, some boards will actually have a separate finance committee and an audit committee, and others roll them together. I've seen boards that have audit/finance or finance/audit. And I know from firsthand, we had actually 2 CPAs and a bank president on ours. So nothing got by them.
I will say that I do appreciate the sort of global and national view that we get from our investment partners. I do find that helpful, not just for our own investments, but for a good look at what's going on, across the country and how it pertains to what's going on in our area. So I wouldn't drop that necessarily. I do like that overall view.
I think there's a potential to ask for the indicators and to be talking about thresholds above or below what we expected. And so then to provide some analysis as for why the results came in higher or lower than we expected them to come. And obviously it's all within policy, but that may be the way to cut some of that down, is to not go over every finding, but to go over findings that are above or below a certain threshold. Yeah.
Let me ask another question that didn't hit my radar. What is the relationship of the college board to the foundation?
We have, it works independently. It has its own board of directors. The staff are college employees that report through Dr. Escamilla, but it does have its own board of directors. When we have one of our regents who serves on that foundation board in an official capacity as regent, serves on that foundation board. We get an annual report from the executive director and are encouraged to participate. Regent Hutchison is our liaison to the foundation board.
I will tell you though that I've just rotated off because they put some term limits after way too long. So as of about yesterday, there's no longer a connection there.
Okay, well then we will have to appoint a new connection.
And the reason I'm asking that is I have seen college situations where foundations start initiatives and then the college board is tagging along. So I'm familiar with a college that is doing a big promise program raising a lot of money for students who don't have Title IV funds, but to assure that every student in that area, in their taxing district, who does not have Title IV funds or other resources has tuition and fees covered up to X number of hours. And it's a $26 million venture. So big for this college. But that was a baby of the foundation, and they got it going. And when I was dealing with the board, they felt like they were playing catch up. Same thing on a performing arts center. Same thing on a couple other initiatives. So I just was curious, do the two boards ever meet together and sort of share status and where things are? Go ahead.
Just from us, so the executive director reports directly to me on my executive team. That way, I make fairly regular reports. Been a little tough this past year, but there's always a report from the president's office, whether it's me or one of my representatives. That way, they're tie-ins. They're tie-ins that way. The idea, the notion of bringing both boards together has been a long time coming. It's been a consideration for a long time, and I will say though, because I do talk to my counterparts around the state, even the country, the relationship here. They're very, very close ties of the people on that board of trustees and this board of regents. Many of them know each other extremely well. And compared to all the stories that I hear from around the state, we have a really, really solid relationship between the two. Could there be more exchanges of information? Absolutely, all day. But the relationships are very, very strong and long term.
And I'm just curious because I know one board recently was doing the report on the CARES funds, and they looked like they were going to be about $200,000 short. And so they had a conversation with the foundation, and the foundation had scholarship money that could be dispersed, and they actually stepped up and dispersed $200,000 above and beyond what the CARES money had paid. So that was part of my question about how the college board, because I do have a bias here. The board of regents needs to drive. You have to have an independent board for for tax reasons and other reasons, but the Del Mar College board needs to be sure that they're in control of, and I don't mean it in a bad way, but of the directions that the foundation goes, because you're ultimately, even though their own discrete component unit and separate 501c3, there's still some responsibility, I think, that the elected board has to be sure that the board is in sync. University of Georgia Foundation threatened to pull all their money out of the University of Georgia over a football coach, a head coach. So, I mean, historically, I've seen some real problems.
So we need to start a football team?
Only after you do baseball, right, Coach?
Libby, you have a comment?
Well, I was going to try to give an example of an area where I felt like we'd gone down the rabbit hole, and something that came to mind that may be me because I report to a board, so I'm a little sensitive about this, but it seems to me that on occasion, without giving a specific example for obvious reasons, I feel like that sometimes we as a board have gotten a bit too much in the weeds on some personnel matters. I don't know if Dr. Escamilla feels that way or not, and I really don't have much historical perspective since I've only been on the board a little over a year now. But I feel very strongly about that we have one employee who reports to us, and that's Dr. Escamilla. And sometimes I feel like in our questions or when we're being briefed about a potential situation, it's human nature to be curious sometimes of all of the ins and outs and the details. And I know for myself, I have to continue to challenge myself to pull up and think about policy and not so much the details of one specific situation.
Mark, do you want to respond to that at all?
Just that over the years, I think we've gone through ups and downs over the years with those kinds of things. We're not that big of a community. There's lots of ties into the community and relationships all over. That's our strength. And sometimes it presents a weakness, but I tend to draw lines there as we can, as I need to, and I'll continue to do that and be very objective. That'd be one of those objective things that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, some of the most difficult moments that I have experienced with personnel and board is when staff didn't do their homework and were recommending a non-renewal or a termination, and our policy has an appeal process where employees can appear before the board and make their appeal, and it's sort of two-tiered. If it's non-renewal, the individual being non-renewed can appear. If it's a termination of a contract employee, they could appear with their attorney. That would just happen to be our local policy. And what really was always uncomfortable for me was when previous evaluations were glowing, and then all of a sudden you get a recommendation to terminate or non-renew. And it's like, what happened? So our college attorney actually came to campus and did, we had brought in a third-party HR person from another community college, and the college attorney and HR did a workshop for anyone who did evaluations, because depending on college structure, sometimes it's very difficult to get an honest evaluation produced for a lot of reasons. And so if you don't have solid grounds for personnel action, it's a tough situation to be in if it goes down a legal route that follows. And I know sometimes people say you can't fire anybody or non-renew anybody, but that's not true. If you do your homework and do your documentation and you've done all the steps that you should be doing, it makes a difference. And you can do what you need to do. But you're very right, Libby. It's an area that it's really where the tire meets the road, where the rubber meets the road, because and you see it, I know Alice had this in public school situation too, where you get a lot of complaints about a certain instructor, and but that's administration's job to really stay in touch with those things and know what's going on with the workforce. And I do realize that a lot of times people know other people and they have alliances, which is fine. And so that's one area that's a tendency to probably ask a lot of questions. And I think the other area that I sensed from talking to all of you, and even to Mark and Christina and Natalie, is sometimes there'll be a prolonged discussion about some metrics or certain things that are being presented, and that may go on, down a road for quite a while. So I'm not saying this is so much of what we were talking about is that harmony, balance, and rhythm that was that line from The Boys in the Boat. And that is that balance piece is the tricky piece, because you have an obligation as regents to be informed, and you are held accountable, and you're holding the institution accountable. That's part of your job. I think the challenge always is, what is the threshold, the level to which appropriate information is being given that satisfies most of the board? So people who have areas of expertise, whether it's accounting or law or public relations or journalism and publishing or the community, they tend to have areas of expertise that are naturally going to be deeper than the rest of the board. So what I encourage boards to do is to engage in those discussions appropriately. And so it's not a matter of at a meeting, I think, saying, well, you don't need that information, that's not our lane. I think if a majority of the board feels like we're way down in the weeds it's appropriate for someone to not take the trip to Abilene, to say, hey, is this really something that we need to be this deep in, or are we out of our lane? Are we staying in our lane, or are we out of our lane? Are we in our purview and asking the right questions? And so I want to shift gears for just a minute because we don't have too much time left before the break. What are some of the questions board members should be asking about the COVID-19 issue?
We seem to be kept up pretty much to date by Mark. Every chance we get to talk, some questions like, are we going to open summer? That's nothing too involved. I don't think that's his responsibility. And his purview, as you said. So that's basically it. I guess we have to have a lot of information down the line about the financial impact that we're going to have.
Yeah, sure.
And how it's going to affect our budget. We're responsible for that.
Yeah.
Mary?
Well, I had put down on sort of as one of the upcoming strategic issues that we didn't get around to talking about is sort of the lessons learned in the long term from this situation, because it's, likely we're going to face it again. So that's sort of a strategic look at what happened and how we responded to it and how we could have responded better, differently, whatever, with the whole idea of resiliency in mind, whether it's another pandemic or, another hurricane or whatever. What did we learn that we can apply in the future? I think those are the kind of questions we need to be asking maybe.
I'd like to know the student impact, drop out the number of students who, Dr. Escamilla and his team put together an enormous number of strategies and personal touches to try to get students to finish the semester and order completion. And some of that we won't know until the end of the summer, as students have had to come back. But ultimately, what was that student impact? How were the CARES Act dollars expended? So those big reporting pieces, not anecdotally, because anecdotally there's going to be good and bad and in between stories all over the place. But again, what were the big buckets of information on how we do? So it's not just a lessons learned, but it would be the start of that lessons learned. Here's the result, and here's how we ended up with our students. And then what did we learn from this? Because there's going to be a lot of learning from our faculty and staff and student support areas. But I think we do need to start with how did our students thrive, or what kind of challenges could they not overcome?
Yeah, I'll give you a little teaser nugget of information on that one, that we had 1/3 less drops this spring than we had last spring. 1/3 less. So just as a tidbit, we that hit us like a ton of.
You don't know if that's because they didn't have to get to school to the physical place here.
We're going to find out. That's just again, it's a teaser because I'm teasing myself because I only have that nugget there. All sorts of anomalies, and summer one. At one point, we were facing at 3% down. Yet with a 3% down from summer to summer, we were up 8% contact hours. It was just all kinds of anomalies out there that we're just waiting to sort through. But
the kind of thing I think would be wise for the board to also consider is its own plan for operation in another crisis. So I'm going to be real specific. Where do you, the board, when decisions have to be made really quickly, feel comfortable delegating some big decisions to the CEO without having to have a called meeting? Number two, where do you feel comfortable having the officers of the board meet and authorize something that has to be done in a one-day period where you can't do a 72-hour posting unless you call an emergency meeting? So I don't know if the board's had those discussions, but I'm dealing with one board right now who they're pretty much a 4-3-2 group. 4 in one camp, 3 in another, and 2 that are not in anybody's. And 3 of the board members had a real problem with certain decisions being reached with the president and the board chair that had to be done in 24-hour notice. They felt that they should have been involved. So that was, but it has more to do with their personality, because I know them, you know, it's not, and they're that way on a lot of other issues. So I think I have seen some college boards pass resolutions that give temporary powers, authority to the CEO, but they expire after X amount of time, where they can make some quick decisions and not have to get board approval, such as some of that care fund distribution and other things like that. Other boards have felt like they needed to get together more often, and we're meeting like several times a month during this crisis. So if the board has never talked about that moving forward, and not that it didn't work well now, I mean, all of y'all might feel that everything worked fine. So I'm not saying we don't need to pick our own wounds and beat up on ourselves, you know, but at the same time, moving forward, you're going to have more hurricanes and storms and times where maybe another virus like this. So I just think and I think, Carol, this rolls into that whole policy development piece that you talked about earlier, where, you know, having these operational understandings of how we work in crisis mode so that you don't have to develop them on the fly or as you go might be something that would be a lesson learned from this. It's a thought. We could probably go on to some really good discussion here, you know, on this whole subject, but let's take a break because it is 1:45 and we go back at 2, and the last hours are the board self-evaluation. And so even though the meeting is not adjourning, do you need to call at this point into closed session, or do you want to reconvene?
Let me read the closed session language, and we will go into closed session, and we'll take the break to remove everyone from the phone and from the room. So let me go back and find my agenda so I can read it correctly. Here we go. The board will enter into closed session under Texas Government Code 551.071 regarding pending and contemplated litigation or settlement offer with possible discussion and action in open session, and is seeking of legal advice from counsel on pending legal or contemplated matters or claims with possible discussion and action in open session, and under Texas Government Code 551.074A1 regarding employment evaluation, assignment duties, discipline, or dismissal of public office or employee, including the annual evaluation of the college president and the board's annual self-evaluation. The time is 1:45 p.m. We'll take a few-minute break to, again, clear the room. Thank you. So as we wrap up the meeting, thank you. We're back. We've come back from closed session at 3:52 p.m. There's no action coming out of closed session. As the board prepares to recess our meeting for tonight, you do have homework. Mr. Holda sent us a document regarding our expectations of the CEO and the CEO's expectations of us. And so we ask you to fill that out tonight, and then to be thinking about potential strategies related to the board action plans that we discussed in closed session. When we come back in open session tomorrow, we'll have some discussion around those items and potential strategies for that. Any other questions or comments or for the good of the board? If not, then the board is recessed at 3:53 p.m. and we will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. in this boardroom. Thank you.